Man, I must be having a bad day for analyzing. I think this guy also has a pretty bad ability. Mummy, co-redacted Rygus okay, I won't do that. Only ability is completely useless when dealing with Pokemon that don't make use of their ability. For those who do, they simply have to avoid hitting Cofagrigus with a direct attack, which transfers the Mummy ability to them. And for some reason, if you wanted Mummy back on your Cofagrigus, which, coincidentally, it never lost, you could use Skill Swap. Because that makes sense. Apparently, Cofagrigus' special abilities go beyond ability stealing. A Pokédex entry for it, because those are never wrong, stated could eat nearby humans and when they died, turn those dead bodies into mummies. While that doesn't have use in battle, in nature, should humans ever come down to its tombs and crypts. Let's just say society would be glad to have those people off its hands, for the most part. Cofagrigus without Mummy would probably be exactly the same as with Mummy. It might last if it's battling Breloom with Effect Spore or something with the ability as opposed to without, but all in all, the normal effects of this ability, not including eating people, don't give much to Cofagrigus. Cofagrigus has to be one of the weirdest Pokemon out there. After all, it is a coffin with 4 arms. Its ability, Mummy, also suggests that it is under some sort of curse. Taking a closer look at a Cofagrigus, I noticed that it has 2 red eyes and a cheeky grin coming from inside the coffin. Because of this, I believe that there is a mummy inside the Cofagrigus' body that passes on the mummy curse to any Pokemon that makes contact with it. However, the curse is pretty harmless and doesn't do much in a battle aside from removing the attacking Pokemon's ability and replacing it with Mummy. The interesting thing is that Mummy keeps getting passed around whenever a Pokemon with it is attacked by a move that makes contact. This can easily make Mummy backfire, affecting some of your team members by replacing their abilities. Without Mummy, Cofagrigus could quite possibly be better than it is now, since the ability overall isn't too effective, but perhaps Cofagrigus needs Mummy to survive. I believe that this ability is responsible for keeping the Mummy in Cofagrigus alive so it can control the coffin's attacks and movement. Even then, Cursed Body still seems to fit Cofagrigus quite well as an ability and would provide greater utility by potentially disabling an opponent's move. The Mummy Pokemon, Cofagrigus, is a throwback to the Pokemon world before there were Pokemon trainers to capture wild Pokemon. Cofagrigus' ability comes from its lineage that links it back to the pharaohs of the ancient world. This ability changes an opposing Pokemon's ability to Mummy if the Pokemon makes contact with it. This allows Cofagrigus to stop many wild Pokemon that rely on their abilities to function at their peak. This ability works by passing on Cofagrigus' inner spirit to the attacking Pokemon, giving Cofagrigus some kind of loose control over it. It is likely that Cofagrigus is reliant on this inner spirit for any kind of sentience, as Cofagrigus cannot be found with any other abilities. It is also theorized that this ability is the reason Cofagrigus came back from the dead as a ghost Pokemon, but it is not clear to what avail. Maybe Cofagrigus is planning to make every Pokemon in the world a mummy. The Mummy's Curse. The old tale goes that Cerulean Jones, the famous Spoke architect, discovered a labyrinth of mazes far beneath the Relic Castle. In those dusty tunnels he came upon the sarcophagus of the pharaoh Tutankhamun. As he edged closer and closer to the golden tomb, he sensed that someone was watching him and then, bam! It got him, and he was never heard from again. It's a story that's all too common when dealing with the coffin Pokemon, Cofagrigus. Cofagrigus, and its pre-evolution Yamask, have the unique ability with the super unique and original name, Mummy. When a Pokemon uses a contact move on Cofagrigus, their own ability is replaced by Mummy. This aids Cofagrigus in its goal to mummify as many people and Pokemon as possible, because as the saying goes, misery loves company, and Cofagrigus are miserable all the time. Rumor has it that each Cofagrigus is haunted by a soul who is not able to move on. These ghosts become trapped in the golden tombs and have to find a replacement soul before theirs is able to leave. So Cofagrigus lure likely targets with gold and treasure before mummifying them. The new mummy then must play host to the coffin and the cycle repeats itself. Frankly, it's terrifying. The Pokemon's ability transforms a living creature into a mummy. Do you know how they make mummies? They pull their brains out through their noses. Their noses. I've got the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it. I for one think we'd all be better off if Cofagrigus had a different ability, something less horrifying and more battle-oriented. Jellicent. A Pokémon to whom an increasingly large number of frankly bizarre traits are often attributed, and subject to some of the more panicky Pokédex entries. If the slightly worrying current black entry is to be believed, then the seas south of the Castlia Peninsula ought to be somewhat choked with wrecked ships, and yet the Royal Unova appears to be able to make a daily cruise through these waters without any kind of complaint. In any case, such aggressive behavior toward entities much larger than themselves would suggest a fiercely territorial nature, but such does not appear to be the case. Any number of sampling studies have shown multiple Jellicent coexisting in the same vicinity of water, though of course with significantly higher numbers of Frillish. Of course, to bicker about what we apparently already know is all very well, and there are certainly cases of Jellicent having overturned smaller fishing or even research boats in reliable literature. However, this is to ignore the biggest puzzle facing us when we are forced to examine Jellicent. How does it work? It has distinguishable mouthparts, and optical facilities, so must in some respect have a working central nervous and in all likelihood digestive system. This is complicated, however, by the fact that a significant percentage of its body is nothing but water, and its unusual feeding habits, which have, even to this day, been chalked up to the rather fanciful explanation that it is feeding off its victim's life energy, whatever that may be. As one of those who refuse to chalk up peculiar observations to the doings of wizards, I find this mystery particularly compelling. Jellicent's poisons are, in the view of most, remarkably potent. One would think that such would be counterproductive for a Pokémon that can only feed on living prey. Furthermore, I would see the fully developed mouthparts as evidence of it needing to, at least, ingest some sort of organic material. I am not certain of the conversion rate of life energy to matter, but I am certain it could not be sufficient to build the entirety of Jellicent's complex anatomy under any reasonable time frame. Oh, and I am unconvinced that the mouth exists purely to render the organism able to say its own name. As far as gender differences go, Jellicent exhibit some of the most extensive ever recorded. While one would assume that the blue color of the male Jellicent was a useful camouflage technique, this argument rather breaks down when one observes the somewhat alarming pink coloring of the female. Furthermore, the female's mouthparts are visible above its flotation ring, whereas the male's, which is bigger and more pronounced, is hidden below. Whatever the evolutionary reasons for this are, it has led some to consider whether, like Nidoran and Tauros, Miltank, whether the females ought to be considered a different species altogether to the males. This argument is still ongoing. The standard Pokémon metabolism is essentially the same to any other living being, where food is digested into smaller components which the organism uses to support its life. However, Jellicent isn't bound by such feeble limitations. It actually knows how to tap into the very source of life itself. So, since it completely lacks a digestive system, it therefore deemed it appropriate to equip itself with other traits to make its hunt for prey much more manageable, thus becoming a royal pain within its oceanic habitat. There is little known about the few species who feed upon life energy, or spectralvas as they're now apparently called. Expeditions to Jellicent nests usually result in more eggs adorning their home, and bred individuals aren't as vicious in their diet as their wild counterparts. It may not even be an entirely biological dilemma, since more and more people are suggesting that it can only be explained through metaphysics. The most popular theory right now? It steals and converts raw existential energy to fuel its own physical presence and body functions. Shockingly enough, none have been able to repeat the process in a lab environment. The cnidarians, jellyfish, corals, anemones, and others, are a bizarre group of creatures, but jellicent would be considered bizarre even in respect to the other members of the phylum. The strangest feature is its pronounced sexual dimorphism, unusual in a group of animals that are usually hermaphrodites, with all members capable of reproducing asexually as well. While there are some cnidarians, some species of corals for instance, that are male or female, releasing only sperm or eggs, they all live the same immobile, filter-feeding lifestyle that leaves literally no need for sexual dimorphism of any kind aside from release sperm or release eggs. Why a free-floating medusa would need to evolve notable sexual dimorphism was a great mystery to scientists in the past. The female jellicent is especially strange, as its pink coloration makes it an easily discovered target for many predators, both in and above the water. Many sea creatures use red coloration, but this is usually used in moderately deep-sea environments where the red wavelength of light rays are unable to reach, leaving these creatures an infuriatingly difficult to spot. Dark color to the naked eye. Jellicent, including the females, are found in great numbers at the surface of the water, although they are capable of adjusting the air in their bodies to sink to impressive depths. So what's with the pink colors? The answer is a very bizarre evolved cycle of reproduction, fitting of a cnidarian. Like all cnidarian Pokémon, other species include Tentacool, Tentacruel, Corsola, and the once thought to be extinct Lileep and Cradily. Jellicent has the odd ability of making hard-shelled eggs. However, Jellicent takes it one step further, and reinforces the eggs to allow them to act as parasites to predators, or perhaps it would be better to think of them as seeds, and the jellicent as a fruit. It turns out that jellicent are completely capable of feeding and mating at greater depths, where both blue and pink colors are difficult to detect, and they can live relatively undisturbed. They only come to the surface specifically to be preyed upon, for the purpose of reproduction. Once a female jellicent, I felt it was necessary to specify in this day and age, successfully takes sperm into its body, it produces tough eggs inside its body, and swims to the surface. There, it waits until it is attacked, and ingested, by a predatory bird or fish. At this point, the seeds are eaten by the predator, and will eventually pass through the predator's digestive tract and be released into the water, where they will eventually hatch into the medusa that will become fully formed frillish. With this ability, jellicent are able to spread to new areas and form new colonies more efficiently. Meanwhile, the parent jellicent will regenerate from its uneaten body parts, usually reproducing asexually into 3 or 4 new frillish. On a side note, jellicent's endurance and recovery abilities used in battle evolved for the purpose of this asexual reproduction method. The only limitation on this incredible life force is the great energy drain that results. The loss of body parts and process of forced regeneration results in a great loss of energy, and the feat cannot be repeated until the medusa feeds enough and grows enough to stabilize its condition. So after the jellicent has been eaten, the resulting frillish sink to greater depths to reach. What Pokémon Kecleon was a mystery to the Pokémon world for a very long time. When Professor Birch first discovered it, he had it classified as a grass-type Pokémon. Not long after its discovery, numerous science geeks, professors, began arguing over its typing. Professor Oak said it was a water type. Professor Elm insisted it was a rock type. There hadn't been a bigger debate over a Pokémon's typing since the Great Sudowoodo debacle. The professors agreed to disagree and began learning more and more about Kecleon, which is when they discovered its amazing ability. Its ability, color change, changes Kecleon's typing to whatever move it was last hit by. It was because of this that the professors had been finding numerous different Kecleon types out in the wild. For research purposes, Kecleon are considered a normal type, but thanks to color change, they've been able to adapt to many different environments. Ice-type Kecleon live in snowy landscapes, while fire-type Kecleon thrive in harsh volcanoes. Color change also makes Kecleon a real nuisance in battle, as you must plan your moves carefully if you wish to hit it super effectively. The one downside is that Kecleon will rarely get boosts due to stab, which means it will lose a lot of potential attacking power. Despite, as per usual, having a subpar ability for battling, Kecleon has one of the most interesting abilities, being similar to only Ditto and Arceus in that its typing changes. According to my research, the only time the ability takes effect is when Kecleon takes direct damage. No substitutes or anything. Status seems to fail as well. In battle, Kecleon's defenses are decent, but the opponent gets to pick the typing, unless its trainer can successfully use switching Pokémon around to their advantage. Out of battle, Kecleon has much more control over its ability, being able to change color at will, even becoming invisible. Sadly, its trademark zigzag across its belly is the end of it, as that does not turn invisible as well. Maybe he can hide in front of Charlie Brown. Chameleons are mighty creatures sculpted by the gods themselves. Kecleon, however, is a pretty terrible excuse for a chameleon. Relatively weak and with a less than desirable move pool, Kecleon is generally outclassed in any situation it finds itself in. In the wild, however, Kecleon is known for its main ability, trolling. Kecleon, using its ability color change, creates invisible walls which block unsuspecting trainers from passing. This is generally the only use for color change, so wild Kecleon simply use their ability to cause trouble for trainers wherever they go. Even when in battle Kecleon is trolling you. After using an item to reveal the invisible wall to be a Kecleon, you might think Kecleon is a mighty beast that deserves a slot in your team. However, on capture, you realize that Kecleon is pretty mediocre and instantly discard it into your box. That is the true wonder of the ability color change. It gets Kecleon captured and allows it to live a safe life in Lynette's PC, rather than falling victim to predators that would have no trouble ripping this poor excuse for a chameleon limb from limb. Kecleon is an amazing Pokémon in the way that it can adapt to different conditions very easily. Firstly, Kecleon can change the color of its skin to help it camouflage with its surroundings. Speaking about its camouflaging technique, not all of Kecleon becomes completely invisible. There is a red zigzag pattern on a Kecleon's belly that is always visible. I believe that the zigzag pattern stays visible so older Kecleon can still have an eye on younger Kecleon even if they are being cheeky and turning invisible, so that they can protect them. The ability also has an effect if the Kecleon is in a battle. Whenever Kecleon is hit with an attack, its skin senses the attack and changes Kecleon's type into the type of attack that hit it. This defense mechanism lets Kecleon more often than not resist the opposing Pokémon's attacks. Quite possibly due to its ability, Kecleon can also learn a large variety of move types for a normal type. By level up, Kecleon learns a lot of Psychic, Dark, and Ghost moves, and the invention of TMs help Kecleon even further by boosting its different coverage options. Ability, Flower Gift, is responsible for making it react unlike any other Pokémon when it is under bright sunlight. Its petals open up to help it absorb as much sunlight as possible. This is proven through its Pokédex entry that states if it senses strong sunlight, it opens its folded petals to absorb the sun's rays with its whole body. Cherrim's Flower Gift is known to boost the attack and special defense of all party Pokémon in sunlight. Scientists are still not sure how Cherrim does this, but some hypothesize that after absorbing the sunlight through its petals, Cherrim releases a special kind of chemical which turns the sunlight into an energy source that can be transmitted to other Pokémon telepathically. Once this energy has entered another Pokémon, it begins to flow down to the muscles, strengthening them and thus boosting attack. A lot of the energy stays at the mind to help absorb special attacks. While this theory does make perfect sense, it is often rejected because Cherrim has not been proven to possess psychic abilities. This ability does seem pretty good in a battle where Ninetales can provide sun support via drought, but unfortunately Cherrim would probably be dead weight on one of these teams due to chlorophyll Pokémon being much better options for drought abusers. These little suckers are adorable. They're all shy most of the time, but get a little sunlight on them and they become the life of the party. Flower gift is just that, a gift. When a cherrim unveils its leaves in the sun, everyone around it benefits. The petals on its head contain very special chemicals that not only react within its own body but release themselves and take root in neighboring life. These chemicals are found nowhere else in the natural world and are considered by many to be the single strongest all-natural boost for your body. When this information became public, the news had rather unsettling consequences. The chemicals began showing up in lemonades all over the Kanto region. It appeared that Team Rocket were harvesting the spores of cherrim in their underground base in Celadon City and were distributing these loose-tied lemonades all over the globe. Officer Jenny was quoted as saying, "It was a real sick business, the poor cherrim were being milked like a bunch of milk tank." Officer Jenny, this appears to be a different Officer Jenny, man, that must get confusing, was also quoted in saying, "Boosted lemonades give me the strength I need to catch criminals like these every day." What? Was she advertising for them? Anyway, even with this unique trait, cherrim are infrequently found in real Pokémon competition due to the scarcity of its desired conditions. Also, its stats ain't good. Such a cute Pokémon, but such a weird ability. Flower gift. Cherrim's only ability, raises Cherrim's attack and special defense stat by 50%, as well as Cherrim's teammates in double battles, but only in sunny weather. I'm not sure what I can say about this combination, as it literally does nothing for it in the natural world, but who'd want to hurt such a cute Pokémon? In battle, it sounds worthwhile, but it's not really worth a slot on your team for it, and another slot to set up Sun in Darkness. The flower Pokémon Cherrim is nothing to be frightened of. However, when the sun's rays are beaming down on this Pokémon, it transforms into a much more powerful version of itself. Cherrim's ability, Flower Gift, is the reason for this transformation. Flower Gift works due to the highly sensitive light sensors in Cherrim's outer body. Akin to rod and cone cells in the human body, these cells send rapid impulses to the central nervous system when excited. The result of this is clear: Cherrim becomes a much more powerful Pokémon after this has occurred. Many scientists believe that Cherrim's body allows for rapid muscle hypertrophy and atrophy, meaning that it can grow and shrink at will. In strong sunlight, Cherrim has the ability to constantly photosynthesize, so the energy for rapid hypertrophy will be there. In the absence of sun, however, it folds back into a bud and shrinks slightly to conserve its energy. Rampardos line is a very special case among the so-called fossil Pokémon in that it doesn't seem to display a secondary typing unlike all the other revived Pokémon. It is widely agreed that the primary rock typing of all revived specimens is actually a side effect of fossilization, whereby the genetic information of the Pokémon slowly adapts to the mineral properties of the surrounding sediment over the course of millions of years. Rampardos, however, might have already been rather rock-like during its lifetime, preventing a significant typing change during fossilization and thus resulting in its unique monotyping. Rampardos' claim to fame is its massively thickened skull roof, forming a prominent dome that is used in typical rock-type fashion as a blunt weapon. The destructive force behind Rampardos' head smashes is widely known and feared and must have been an effective deterrent to potential predators of its time. Rampardos' head is supported by heavily constructed vertebrae and strong neck muscles, which absorb most of the impact forces unleashed during such attacks. However, studies on live specimens have revealed that Rampardos isn't able to form a completely straight line with its backbone, preventing it from recklessly smashing in at full force without risking injury to itself. Furthermore, the small impact surface provided by the rounded skull dome wouldn't have granted Rampardos the necessary stability to engage in direct head-on-head combat against rivals, as is commonly portrayed in popular culture. The skulls would have instead slipped off each other, resulting in glancing blows which would have put great strain on the Pokémon's neck. Therefore, Rampardos was much more likely to target wider contact surfaces such as the flanks of its enemies with its head butts. We can conclude from this that the rounded and strikingly colored dome wasn't dedicated solely to combat but was also used for display purposes alongside the prominent hornlets and the enlarged canines in the lower jaw, all of which are noticeably less distinct features in the juvenile form Cranidos. Against popular belief, the species was primarily herbivorous, as evidenced by the rows of small teeth covered by developed cheeks, allowing for at least rudimentary chewing. Rampidos's long and broad trunk also provides enough space for an enlarged digestive tract used to ferment and break down plant matter. However, rampidos would occasionally supplement their diet with the early grass and bug types for an additional protein intake. A particularly well-preserved rampidos fossil find from the Oreburg mine in 2006 included the remains of a primitive trico in rampidos's stomach region, which gave rise to rampidos's long-held image as a fierce carnivore, even in a certain scientific context such as rampidos's first Pokédex. Let's clear this up right off the bat: not all pyroa are bad parents. Specifically the female pyroa, which are actually the ones that search for food and take care of the hunting and other resources and pretty much handle all the parenting. The troublemaker here is the merciless, greedy, and lazy father. As the female pyroa take care of all the mentioned activities to ensure the survival of both the adults and, most importantly, her child, other than occasionally serving as a bodyguard, the male mostly sits around and waits for the female to come back with food. They also tend to put themselves as a priority when it comes to eating rather than the child or the mother, usually leaving only scraps for the rest of the pride, especially during rough hunting seasons. Now to the main event of this broken family's life. We certainly have a tragic ending. As we're all aware, pyroa live in prides, led by the pyroa with the biggest fiery mane. Because of this hierarchy, you can only assume that dominance is an important factor to a male pyroa. They are a proud Pokémon prepared for anything in order to keep their status of the alpha male in the family at any cost. Such a high cost that it even includes trying to kill little Leo, their cub, once it evolves, matures, and shows signs of being able to become more dominant than the father. There have also been cases where we witnessed the mother sharing the same fate if the male pyroa turned out to go on a rampage. So watch out, because this children's favorite attraction at the Pokémon Zoo certainly doesn't deserve an award for parenting. Giraffe's hindbrain is a major anomaly and a challenge for developmental biology. Like most Pokémon, Giraffe's anatomy follows a bilateral symmetry. You can slice it in half to produce mirror image halves, but more importantly it has a front end and a back end. The determination of anterior and posterior positions occur when Pokémon are still an embryo, and the Pokémon's anatomy develops inside its egg according to this basic body plan. The anus would be located in the posterior, whereas the mouth would be located in the anterior. This body plan also allows the concentration of sensory equipment and the brain on the anterior end. The general body plan allows Pokémon to face its wildlife challenges from the front while leaving its wastes behind. Girafferig seemingly defies this conventional anatomical development, and ends up with what is clearly a rudimentary face on its tail, with teeth and all. As presented by Dr. Burkle's figure, the fact that the two brains share the same spinal cord implies that they both originated from the same neural tube, which also organizes the Pokémon's neural network in accordance to the anterior-posterior body plan. Truly a biological wonder. Bringing our attention back to the tail, I find it hard to believe that the tail, with a mind of its own, does not sleep. Sleep is necessary to restore brain function and maintain the cyclical pattern of neural activity. It's improbable that the hindbrain is on high gear 24/7. The hindbrain may have adopted a shark-like light sleep schedule, where one hemisphere of the brain turns off while the other is still active. Therefore, each half of the brain gets to rest while the tail still maintains its guard, sleep biting. So here we are, back to dugong again. Not only do they steal eggs, they're also pretty negligent parents. It doesn't seem like it at first. The mother is very dedicated, often turning to starvation for the sake of feeding the little one. However, This enthusiastic parent keeps this up only for the first 2 weeks, after which the female dugong considers the feeding period to be over and swims away in order to mate again, leaving the baby seal helpless on the ice. Seal's light blue fur, the main source of its cold temperature protection, is yet to fully grow after only 2 weeks, so the baby is basically left trapped on the ice, unable to enter the frigid waters and find food. Until the fur has fully grown, not all babies are able to sustain their health, and after a considerable loss of body weight, we're looking at a statistic of 20% of seal unfortunately not surviving this lengthy starvation time to redeem the males. As we take a look at the Empoleon family, probably the finest example of a dedicated father. As the mother leaves to replenish herself in the sea after laying the egg for a period of time that usually appears to be 2 to 3 months, the male Empoleon is left with a truly troublesome task. As the father is assumed to guard the egg, usually by keeping it between his feet, the survival of their young one in the egg is truly a fragile factor ready to be determined by the smallest of changes, with both freezing temperatures and the father's lack of balance potentially becoming just the thing that will end the chick's life. Other than these obstacles that make Empoleon's job harder provided by nature, we've witnessed that at night when the temperature drops even further, dugong tend to attempt to take hold of the egg in case their prey hunting fails. Since they're not as graceful on land as they are under the sea, these attempts are usually unsuccessful, as the Empoleon tends to notice them just in time to threaten them with their sharp wing edges. Nevertheless, it seems that dugong is as persistent in stealing the egg as much as Empoleon is at guarding it, making itself a well-known royal pain for this penguin-like Pokémon. Much like Empoleon is known for defending its bride at all cost, the male is just as determined to protect its fragile egg even if it means starvation, since his sudden movement can, due to a lack of heat from the father's own body, bring the egg into a dangerous situation. When I had an opportunity to witness this process myself while documenting it with a filming crew, all of us were fascinated by the combination of dedicated parenting and heroism of Empoleon. Truly an experience to remember. As we proceeded to dive deeper into the sea, it's no wonder that we came across such a surprising parenting system in an aspect of the Pokémon world that's too vast to be fully explored at this point. Who knows what revelations we are yet to come across. After our research team traveled to the truly extreme depths of the sea where Kingdra resides, we discovered an unexpected oddity: male pregnancy. That's right, it's the male Kingdra that carries the babies in that yellow scale-covered belly. More specifically, they have what we call a brood pouch, where the female's eggs are deposited for an incubation period that usually lasts 45 days. After which they give birth to fully grown Horsey. These unique species appear to be able to get quite large while carrying the babies, and it is during this period that they tend to reside in uninhabited areas of the sea, usually the common underwater caves, as they build up energy and prepare for bringing a new life into the world. This is also a perfect environment for them, as there's rarely any risk of other predators endangering their survival at these extreme depths. With only small groups of lantern and chinchu around, which light up these areas and present no threat to Kingdra, they're able to calmly prepare for birth. Speaking of these caves, we've finally managed to put an end to one of the silly Pokédex entries that claimed that Kingdra would be responsible for every case of a ship being swallowed by a massive whirlpool simply by yawning while sleeping in the caves. We've noticed a massive amount of the now invasive Luminian species dominating the area due to the fears of local fishermen for their boat to the grasslands. The Kangaskhan family was certainly the highlight of our research. Although they always oscillated in the past between being on the verge of extinction and reaching a stable population, this female-only species is protected by law, so we managed to get our chance at filming them in the safari zone. The very mascot of several kindergartens, this nurturing Pokémon's overprotective nature became a symbol for many parents around the world. As we're all aware, Kangaskhan is always ready to guard the child at all costs, keeping it constantly safe in the pouch on its belly. This protective nature is brought to a whole new level as we witness Kangaskhan even sleeping while standing up for the sake of preventing the child from being crushed, continuing this for around 3 years until the baby is finally ready to become independent. Now that we've got the common knowledge and the info from Pokédex entries covered, it's time to discuss the amazing ability of Kangaskhan to show up immediately to aid its baby within the very few minutes the child ends up in a dangerous situation. We've never had a chance to film this event, but many researchers assume that an acoustic signalization system is what enables the mother to react so swiftly, most likely a loud cry for help unique to Kangaskhan and the child that they are able to specifically recognize. It's a very effective strategy, as sound is able to travel great lengths, although very energetically costly for the child. As the signal roams through the area, Kangaskhan releases pheromones stimulating the Pokémon to run and fight more efficiently, much like human adrenaline. Our research team was left wanting more, and so we went dwelling into the Megastone waters guided by the rumors of Kangaskhan reacting in a unique way to its appropriate stone. We were left with no solid evidence. But, after vigorous theorizing and continuously analyzing an image of Mega Kangaskhan from a questionable source, we assumed that, since the stones are able to enhance the main traits of a Pokémon, what would happen to the parent Pokémon in this case is immediate growth of the child, leaving the mother unaffected. Considering that Megastones represent an area that is little understood and still not fully explored, the details of why this would happen and the process itself are basically a shot in the dark, regardless of the fact that the theory received positive reactions. Girafarig is quite a unique Pokémon. It appears to be closely linked to the biological genus Giraffa due to its lengthy neck and distinguished horns. Even the leopard-like spots on its hide indicate this close relation. Girafarig seems to differ, however, resides in its hind parts. Girafarig lack a normal tail. Instead, they have an entirely different head on their behind. This second head has olfactory, gustatory, and optical functions and is capable of executing a variety of coordinated efforts, including biting. Pokémon Gold. What is perhaps the most fascinating about Girafarig's secondary head is that it houses an entirely different brain of its own. Many have assumed that Girafarig have only one brain that controls the functionality of the other half, but modern science has found that this is not the case. Further examination has shown that the second head has its own brain. How much functionality it has independent of the primary brain is up for debate. However, there is evidence that when Girafarig sleep, its rear end will stay up all night and keep guard. Pokémon Sapphire. Figure 203.1 shows the integrated connection between the two brains of Girafarig. Both nerve cords extend from the respective medulla oblongata and travel down the spinal cord, where they then meet at bodily division, which is easily distinguishable from noting the change in color of Girafarig's hide. Both brains contain their communication center at the dorsal side of the brain. An additional brain may seem like an oddity in the natural world. Polycephaly is usually a condition in which two separate creatures are joined before birth. The condition usually results in a poor quality of life for the creatures involved, with animals dying young. This is not so uncommon in the world of Pokémon. Some Pokémon are in fact several that become bound together later in life, such as Magneton and Weezing. Other Pokémon are single organisms that grow or split off additional brains, such as Dodrio and Swellow. Girafarig is unusual in the sense that its brain is situated in the tail at the end of the spinal cord instead of splitting into its own spinal column as demonstrated by Dr. Burkle. It is also far less intelligent than those examples. This makes it unlikely that the Pokémon's additional brain was the result of a duplication of its existing brain and probably developed independently. A feasible way the tail could have occurred is if a part of the autonomic nervous system and reflex arcs near or in the tail expanded and gained duplicate sensory organs. The autonomic nervous system is responsible for the unconscious control of bodily organs like digestion, and reflex arcs are responsible for automatic responses to stimuli such as leaping away from a source of pain. Some parts of the autonomic system can work in tandem with the conscious brain, allowing for manual control of functions like breathing. This would help explain behaviors such as the tail chewing while the main mouth eats, since the tail is not truly independent of the main brain. A reason for this extra head may simply be one of self-defense. The tail is reactionary and will automatically attempt to bite people or other Pokémon when met with certain stimuli, mainly smell or touch. Its teeth are jagged and many, which will cause numerous puncture wounds as well as holding the threat in place to be kicked. This wards off predators from a Girafairig's vulnerable hindquarters while browsing. It also serves as a warning system while the Pokémon sleeps, since the extra head doesn't have faculties that require graceful swimmers of commendable strength have settled their reputation on the land as someone you wouldn't want to mess with, so you'd think they'd be more than capable of providing fantastic protection to their young ones with their endurance, but you'd actually be quite wrong. Not really interested in parenting of any kind. They usually at least try to search for a convenient spot to lay their eggs, after which they leave, not getting involved at all with the rest of soon-to-be Poliwag's life. Due to this cruel fate, Poliwag's body went through some changes over the ages to handle the rough start they face at first, with what was originally a fragile Pokémon and an easy target for those that search for prey getting a semi-transparent skin to be a lot more elastic, preventing it from getting ripped when bitten. Although they're still very clumsy when it comes to movement on land, you can usually find these little guys swimming around ponds or lakes, or at least staying near them to ensure a quick escape if temporary and close relative of the offensive powerhouse Rampardos. Bastiodon yet took on a completely different strategy in the prehistoric struggle for survival, total defense. With a huge head frill made of massive bone and a sturdy armored hide, the Pokémon became a near impenetrable fortress in front of its enemies. The armor consisted of smooth ossified scales which were further reinforced with a biomineral very similar to that found in modern steel types, and was especially strong around the head and frill, though it also extended towards the Pokémon's back and limbs, leaving only the belly and neck vulnerable. Healed claw and tooth markings on the frills and horns of many fossils prove that Bastiodon was very capable of holding its own against and warding off the many fierce predators of its time, including flocks of Archeops and even adolescent Tyrantrum. A particularly spectacular find is the so-called fighting dinosaurs fossil from the early 70s, which provides a prehistoric snapshot of a Bastiodon and Archeops locked into combat. Apparently desperate for food, Archeops engaged the adolescent Bastiodon in an attempt to reach the Pokémon's vulnerable neck and underside with its deadly claws, while the Bastiodon managed to bite and break the aggressor's right arm. It is thought that a sudden sand flow buried the Pokémon mid-battle, preserving both parties in a sensational prehistoric action scene. As can be expected from their close phylogenetic relationship, Rampardos and Bastiodon do share multiple underlying features despite their drastically opposite appearances. Where Rampardos shows some signs of a primitive chewing capacity, Bastiodon actually possesses highly sophisticated adaptations to chewing, with large dental batteries in the back of its mouth acting like scissors to shred plant matter. This allowed Bastiodon to break down the sparse fibrous vegetation of its arid habitat extremely efficiently, including the new and uprising grass, which certainly was an important contributor to the species' success. Another interesting aspect displayed by both lines is the significant form change they underwent while growing up, something that has proven to be quite confusing when interpreting and classifying the fossil records of the species. Observations on revived specimens confirmed that the juvenile form, Shieldon, started out with a smooth rounded head shield that gradually became more squarish and rugged as it matured, while the horns and tusks grew larger and more defined, though they did not serve any offensive or defensive purpose at any point in the maturing process. The over 1 meter, 3.3 feet, tall frills of the adult Bastiodon were adorned with several smaller hornlets and covered in colored markings and were certainly a magnificent sight to behold. Besides acting as an intimidation tool against potential predators, the shield's appearance is also thought to have played a vital part in intra-species communication and recognition. This social function has sparked lots of contemporary discussion due to recent discoveries of concentration deposits holding hundreds of bastiodon fossils, supporting the notion that bastiodon formed giant herds comparable to those of modern wildebeests and zebras. According to some estimations, those megaherds encompassed thousands of individuals and performed extensive seasonal migrations, complex defensive formations, and elaborate mating rituals. How exactly these prehistoric Pokémon were able to engage in such multi-layered social behavior despite their seemingly small and primitive brains is still one of the great questions of paleontology that remain to be answered. How exactly these prehistoric Pokémon were able to engage in such multi-layered social behavior despite their seemingly small and primitive brains is still one of the great questions of paleontology that remain to be answered. Ruler of the prehistoric world, and arguably the most popular and iconic dinosaur Pokémon of all time, Tyrantrum has always instilled a certain fascination in both laymen and professional paleontologists alike, not only due to its sheer size and power, but also as one of the most advanced and specialized of ancient reptilian Pokémon to ever walk the Earth. The successful revival of this magnificent beast in early 2013 by Galosian scientists has been an international sensation and is widely held as one of the greatest milestones of modern paleontology. What sets Tyrantrum apart from previous carnivores is numerous unique adaptations which allowed it to rise to the very top of the food chain of its time. Tyrantrum's most revolutionary trait has to be its extreme bite force, which is considered the strongest of all known terrestrial animals in the past and present and is estimated to exceed that of modern Feraligatr, the record holder among contemporary Pokémon, by 3 to 4 times. Unlike other predatory dinosaurs, which relied mostly on slashing wounds to slowly bring down larger prey through blood loss, Tyrantrum's bone-crushing bite to the neck would kill the prey in an instant, allowing it to hunt far faster and more efficiently than its competition and take on herbivores that no other predator could, such as the heavily armored Bastiodon and even the enormous Aurorus, whenever available. The source of Tyrantrum's immense bite force lies in the particular design of its skull, which is distinctively broad and boxy and possesses especially large fenestral openings in order to accommodate the enormous jaw muscles. A special joint in the lower jaw helped distribute the incurring forces more evenly and prevented the Pokémon from breaking its own jaws with its powerful bites. Furthermore, the serrated blade-like fangs usually seen in carnivorous species are replaced with huge conical teeth specifically designed to withstand enormous pressure, allowing them to survive at least a few bites at full force before inevitably breaking and being replaced by new teeth. The notion that Tyrantrum indeed hunted for its food is supported by the alignment of its eyes towards the front, granting it a certain extent of stereo vision useful for pursuing moving prey. With its uncharacteristically long legs and a surprisingly light build in proportion to its body size, Tyrantrum was certainly capable of outrunning all but the fastest prey of its time. There are, however, indicators that the king of the dinosaur Pokémon may have preferred more of a scavenging lifestyle over the tedious task of having to hunt itself. For instance, Tyrantrum's long legs are also notable for having a longer calf than thigh, a very unusual configuration among ancient carnivorous species, which is generally associated with high endurance rather than sprinting capacity, and something that would definitely come in handy when searching for leftovers. Another indicator can be found in Tyrantrum's brain, which is remarkably large for a Pokémon of its size but dedicated mostly towards the olfactory bulb, the region responsible for a Pokémon's sense of smell. There is still lots of discussion to be had among paleontologists regarding Tyrantrum's exact feeding habits, but in the end most will agree that it would have acted as both a fierce predator and highly efficient scavenger to some extent, filling a unique niche at the top of the food chain that no other Pokémon could ever hope to challenge. What's a better way to start presenting the good parenting section than with this prime example? After filming several Donphan families, it's clear that after usually having a single or a pair of offspring, they dedicate several years of their lives to raising their young. It's important to mention that Donphan travel in herds, going through rough mountainous terrain and taking care of their young for a considerable amount of their life. This can truly be tough on the parents, specifically the mother. We've managed to document that exactly because of that, the baby throughout its growing up process is surrounded by the majority of the other mothers in the herd, as they take turns between taking care of and watching over each other's children. Through this clever system, the survival of the newborn is absolutely ensured, while it also becomes easier for the mother to recuperate as the others switch around as babysitters. As an extremely caring parent, the mother's eyes are always locked on their babies, as Fanpi are known to be playful and hyperactive, and in the rocky terrain where they usually reside, one clumsy step could cause a lot of trouble. As the herd travels towards the nearest river, where they later make use of the river's edge to dig vertical pits to use as nests, the mother's main task is not to let Fanpi travel around. In case of combat, an unprepared baby is deemed to have a bad time, though a lot of possible predators avoid interacting with Fanpi even with the mother not around, as the destructive ability of Donphan's rolling tackle brings fear to those who witnessed or experienced it. I've been focusing on the mothers because the male Donphan, for the majority of their lives, don't really have a significant role with the newborn's raising. They tend to leave the family group and spend their lives alone while loosely communicating with the other males. Though after they reach a certain point of their life, they tend to spend their time searching for other females. Exactly because of this absence of males, you'll notice that the herds are often led by the female Donphan armed with the largest tusks, indicating both their age and high rank as a respected leader of the group. The herd consists of mostly young females and their offspring, and it is with these types of herds that the mothers tend to extend and maintain relationships with their young ones after they've reached a point in their life where constant parenting isn't required anymore, especially with the females, since the males are generally wandering alone with occasional communications with other Donphan. What kind of laboratorial work Professor Pocket and his team are doing, searching for anti-cancer chemicals within a parasitic fungus, seems highly questionable, in my humble opinion. Regardless, he has done a substantial job of covering the basics of the strange relationship between one bug and its toadstool. My chief area of interest with regard to parasect is exactly what occurs when the fungus does not gain full cerebral control over the host organism. What are the behavioral mechanisms and communication functions of the bug truly like? I'd hypothesize that the invertebrate would be completely unable to communicate with its controlled brethren. Furthermore, it brings to question whether or not parasect can actually breed or not without the aid of a spore-generating shroom. Perhaps the relationship between the two species is more symbiotic than we have assumed in the past. I am excited to see what bits and pieces of research will develop over the next few years on parasect and relationship it shares between fungus and bug. Professor Bummer brought up a very valid topic. What does parasect's spores do to a Pokémon long term? Well, my team has been looking into that. We performed a series of tests on several species of Pokémon including Rattata, Nidoran and Chimchar, and have found that the spores don't appear to have any lasting effects. All subjects have been shown to be just as healthy as the control group at most dosages. At extremely high dosages, 10 times more than a parasect produces during an attack, it may asphyxiate the affected while asleep. It appears that repeated exposure doesn't cause harm. So far our results show that the spores parasect produce are primarily for defense. Spores today are only used for their purposes of reproduction after the paras or parasect breeds to infect their eggs. So why does it do so little harm to other Pokémon? The key may lie in the past, where healthy paras once existed. A method of incapacitating the host without harming it is extremely beneficial to a parasite and may have been the key to the fungi's success. As a final note, to all mushroom maniacs, no, the fungus is not an aphrodisiac and will not cure your problems. Often thought to be the most beautiful of the so-called fossil Pokémon, the Aurorus family was a contemporary of Tyrantrum, a predator that is thought to be the primary cause of the species' unusually small range of habitats. Amora and Aurorus fossils have only been discovered in 3 locations thus far: the northeasternmost and southeasternmost parts of the Galosian Peninsula and the Sinoian Basin, now known as Lake Acuity. Though mostly eclipsed by the revival of Tyrantrum in 2013, researchers have been able to gain much insight into the species' habits and quirks since the first revival of an Amora 4 years ago. Observation has now made it apparent that the species is marked by extreme docility, in contrast to the belligerent Tyrantrum. They do, however, have powerful defense mechanisms that they use when defending their young. They demonstrate an ability to refract and utilize natural light as a means of defense, similar to the abilities of the modern Alolan varieties of Ninetales, as was mentioned in the last edition of Pokémon Biology. They do this through their magnificent sails, which refract light in the manner of a prism. In a blizzard, such a display would be blinding, allowing even the slower Aurorus and Amora to easily escape from potential predators. Thought to once have been more widespread as species, experts hypothesize that the widespread distribution of Tyrantrum limited the Aurora Pokémon's available habitats, pushing it into only the coldest of areas, where Tyrantrum could not survive. Some even suggest that the scarcity of food in such regions led to an early extinction of the species. Ironically, this early extinction, in the most bitterly cold of regions, allowed researchers to obtain surprisingly well-preserved samples of DNA, which in turn has given rise to the revival of the magnificent species today, which my colleagues and I are cultivating in search for a possible anti-cancer chemical agent, are sad sights to behold. The mushroom parasites on their backs have bloomed 3 times the size of their parasect hosts, virtually squashing these powerful insects under the fungus's weight. No wonder it's one of the slowest Pokémon around. Like other fungal parasites of insects, the spores of this mushroom germinate when the time is ripe, infiltrating paras's spiracles, which serve as airways, with its nutrient-absorbing hyphae. As paras grows into parasect, the mushroom gains dominance of parasect's nutrient source, sprouting beautifully on parasect's stunted body. My lab recently discovered that parasect's immune system is on high drive in response to the growing mycelium formed by the mass of hyphae inside its body, producing proteins that retard the expansion of the fungal web of demise. This compound has allowed parasect to delay the complete hijacking and annihilation by the fungi long enough to live a rich and meaningful life. However, the fungus has firmly rooted itself during the initial life stage of parasect, when it was only a paras and its immune system not fully matured. The mushroom has always ended up winning the war of attrition, its exotic and dreadful body triumphantly anchored onto the collapsed shell of the valiant insect, ready to invade nearby colonies of paras. The parasect family is always a reliable subject if one gets the itch to discuss unfortunate and unethical occurrences in the Pokémon world, because what this shroom is doing is nothing short of a complete heist of the bug's being, which, for most people, can be taken as a sad turn of events. But I like to amuse myself with the thought that the predecessor of paras might actually be better off as a mindless drone. Sure, turning into part vegetable may be against its will, but with that non-mutual transformation comes a vast number of options which enables the bugger to expand its defensive and offensive arsenal. At this point, we don't actually know if a deshroomed paras would evolve into something different, or stay as a vulnerable cave-dwelling insect doomed to fear anything which resists claws. So even if the large fungus rules over its brain with an iron root, odds are that parasect would be insignificant without it. It being the primary and only victim of the mushroom's infectious properties could even be a proof that this bug is the only thing weak enough to trigger this turn of events. But since I have no actual observations to support my theory, this is still just a huge maybe. So if we were to jump back to the victim perspective, the life of a paras is essentially predetermined and inevitable. The move spore is one of the few things which made the parasect family notorious for quite some time, but just how defendable is it to spread the seeds of tyranny during battle so that you may score a few turns of sleep among your opponents? The spores only manage to induce momentary sleep when used directly, But we can only begin to wonder if there are any long-term drawbacks for those who are outside the parasect family. Degenerated nerve activity? Abnormal behavior? Athlete's foot? We can only guess. And wait. With that said, I do like parasect. Whenever it responds with a small gesture of affection, I'd like to believe that there's still a small trace of the bug's mind left in there which can act and think on its own. Or it's the shroom which lulls me into a false sense of safety as it plans the next hostile takeover. I, for one, am fine with both scenarios. Many ancient Pokémon, or at least those that appear to have a similar makeup to man-made or artificial structures, have often received great press as examples of the lost abilities of ancient races, as per the ability to create Pokémon. Of course, many of these are fairly fanciful. Shuppet, Bonnet, Baltoy, and Claydol are all noted for their resemblance to old toys, and Bronzor and Bronzong to more mature possessions. Even Voltorb is suggested to have been man-made based only on its resemblance to a Pokeball, despite the clear evidence for natural selection enabling this resemblance through the example of fungus. But none of these comes close to the excitement stirred up by a bizarre little walking automaton named Golett. Golett is a strange creature that appears to bear a similarity to the legendary golems, with some religious leaders suggesting that the great Regigigas may, after fashioning them from the earth, have taught its disciples the same art, or else fashioned these creatures itself, which recently gained momentum through the discovery of an ancient Regigigas tomb deep within Twist Mountain. However, there is little evidence to suggest any sort of deliberate creation on the part of the ancients. A more likely explanation has been put forward that suggests that the theoretical common ancestor of the possession ghost genus, Mansipiem, which includes Shuppet, Baltoy, and others of an ethereal disposition, adapted to possessing ancient, basic, clockwork automatons, which through merging have lost their inner components, but are now fully functional species. Golett's creation is shrouded in mystery, as evidence of the ancient civilization is very sparse, if there even was one. However, there are a few hypotheses as to what powers its system. Compared to the majority of other ghost types, Golett lacks Will-O-Wisp, so it is possible that the ghost type's fire-creating ability was somehow converted to its sole power source. Studies in the still emerging field of move engineering have revealed that Will-O-Wisp can manifest near Golett, but at an intensity much lower than the actual move. However, this does not account for a ghost that was able to fuse with automations, or how a ground typing was infused. Another possibility is that Golett's ghost typing is actually different than the rest. Golett doesn't have the typical ghost-like appearance, but it can still phase through objects and attacks. It is possible that the ancient civilization discovered some kind of rare material with organic elements that allow for animation. A spectroscopy of a piece of Golett's body revealed a dynamic bond structure that could account for the ability to move through things. This explains why we haven't found or are able to make our own Golett. The organic matter would have decomposed or simply fallen apart without a source of power. Initial research into the origins of Dragon Spiral Tower was focused on architecture and the culture that created this pillar to the dragons. This soon changed when Golett acted as a very invasive security force, proving that the old ways remain just as solid, with the result of several scientists being at severe risk of receiving multiple bruises. Seeing the opportunity, much of their attention was afterwards directed towards their would-be attackers, hoping to learn more about the ruined civilization through that approach. The insignia on its chest appears to be a method of ancient programming which dictates the behavior of the individual Golett. From studying the behavior of these clay security guards, anthropologists have also determined much about the culture that Golett came from. With the abilities of Iron First and Klutz, this ancient civilization was one that valued the strength of the individual without the use of held weapons in battle. This does help explain Golett's primary strategy of punching everything to death. Current theories suggest that this ancient culture, while advanced, were so repelled by the use of items that they ended up with a crushing disadvantage against invading forces, whose blunt weaponry showed little weakness against bare-handed combat. The population of Golett in Unova has remained at a constant level throughout the ages, where Dragon Spiral Tower is their preferred habitat and nesting grounds. With the increase of activity in that area during the last years, a sheer majority of them have evolved into Galurk, perhaps as a defense mechanism since the group as a whole appear to protect the location from serious harm. A few individuals have even traveled to the caves preceding the Victory Road, where the ancient structures and buildings in the vicinity could share a close connection to the tower outside of Aziris City. While the theory of Golett being a possessed piece of antique machinery is gaining more favor within the scientific society, one has yet to discover or isolate such a being which, upon merging with inanimate objects, can create new life forms. The energy which powers Golett and its robotic final stage has yet to be identified through conventional means, except that it so far reveals a close likeliness to that of ghost types. Much like our old technology such as cassette tapes and vinyl records, Golett has shown a surprising endurance over the vast period it has been deemed to exist, where those who faint from exhaustion are shortly rebooted from their short hibernation. It's a pity that the desolate ruins of their lost civilization provide few clues about the origin of these creatures. All we can do is to establish that their still miniature bonsai tree Pokémon was first discovered by a trainer in Pyrite Town but was later cataloged in Sin as part of the National Dex. I was very excited to have a Pokémon tied to their region, but no researcher wanted to brave the desert to confirm that they were a natural species, so it was never to be. It is unknown why there are not more Bonsly within it is the ideal environment for their type, but their method of disguise is completely counterproductive to this. There are no plants in the wasteland that is One possible explanation is that despite the ever-looming fear of being watered in greener environments, Bonsly still require a degree of moisture to enable them to cry. Within the sands of there is not enough moisture for Bonsly to effectively cry, which would explain why they are not an abundant species there. Bonsly is the pre-evolution of Sudowoodo, the imitation Pokémon. Sudowoodo's own discovery was mired by the fiasco surrounding its typing. It appears to be a tree yet it's actually a rock type. This comes from its nature as the imitation Pokémon. It survives in the wild by disguising itself as a grass-type Pokémon to avoid its natural enemies, water-type Pokémon. Now while Bonsly too appears to share the appearance of a grass-type Pokémon, it does not act like one. Sudowoodo takes its role as a tree very seriously, where Bonsly does not. Bonsly are rarely seen around any real shrubbery, preferring its more natural habitat of caves, deserts, or other mountainous regions. It is a rock-type Pokémon at heart, and it acts like one. This of course leads to more frequent encounters with water-type Pokémon which are eager to grow stronger in the wild. They seek out these weak rock types in order to grow. Because of this way of life, Bonsly will quickly begin learning to act more and more like grass types, and then when it has mastered the move Mimic will evolve into Sudowoodo. It will then leave its natural habitat and make its home in the nearest forest. Sudowoodo, it's a rock that looks like a tree to disguise itself from potential predators. In all, a clever, but boring, Pokémon. However, a much more interesting query is how its baby, Bonsly, came about. They only hatch when their parents are bred in captivity. Obviously, wild Sudowoodo do not run around holding man-made rock incenses, but it seems as though their proximity to mankind has affected their natural instinct for camouflage. While Sudowoodo get along just fine in nature as a tree, Bonsly bears an evolutionarily unfortunate resemblance to a potted plant which is only a useful disguise in suburbia, where it remains until adulthood. How the incense carries the genetic information needed to change Sudowoodo's shape, and why it reverts upon learning the move Mimic, are not known. What is known is that, though Bonsly are cute, people using them as house pets have contributed to quite the invasive species problem. Far too many evolved Bonsly turned loose refuse to leave their hometowns, instead choosing to simply stand in the middle of the road and block traffic for weeks on end. Bonsly is one of the most unlikely Pokémon around, as its camouflage seemingly has no positive effect in its natural environment. Bonsly appears to take on the appearance of a potted angiosperm, a flowering plant, yet it is quite clear that potted plants simply do not exist naturally in the wild. This has led scientists to theorize that recently hatched wild Bonsly actually live in caves underground, rather than sticking out like a sore thumb in the wild. The Bonsly that we see in the wild are actually mature Bonsly that are ready to evolve into the much more powerful Sudowoodo. These Bonsly are powerful enough to deal with most of the threats of their natural environment, so they have clambered from their underground haven in order to seek experience in battle. Through this battling, they can go on to learn the move Mimic, which is necessary for the evolution process. Not much is known about this, but it can be assumed that it has something to do with improving the camouflage of the young Bonsly and thus giving it the means to evolve. Are by their very nature a competitive species, and are thus used to being punched in the head repeatedly. While this may be damaging to the mental capacity of the average human, the Hitmonchan species have in their design a method of suppressing the brute force of boxing gloves to the face. The secret lies in their large face and the spikes on their head which almost resembles hair. When hit by an object in the face, all vibrations travel from their face up along the head's surface and are split through these spikes, thus protecting the brain from forces that would make you or I babble about Psyduck in a pond while sitting comfortably in a hospital bed. The true strength of Hitmonchan lies within the three elemental punches of fire, ice, and thunder. It has been proven that a Hitmonchan can learn all three of them, even at the exact same time. Most researchers believe they must master one element before they may move on to the next, but the greater lesson is that all three punches and their respective element are not separate. Instead, they are part of a great synergy, and each one complements the other to complete the circle. While many trainers prefer to have only one or two of those punches within its complete moveset, it is generally understood that Hitmonchan first need to control the elemental punches before they'll be able to execute advanced fighting techniques properly. Hitmonchan has a very one-dimensional approach to fighting. This is because Hitmonchan's preferred method of attack is punching. One might think that this would disadvantage Hitmonchan, should he find himself in a battle, but one can be surprised at how versatile this Pokémon can be with that strategy alone. Hitmonchan are so adept at using their fists as weapons that they can fire off a multiple array of attacks, from lightning-fast punches that can burn the opponent, to powerful punches thrown in a corkscrew motion that are capable of breaking through concrete. Hitmonchan can seriously threaten an opponent just by using his hands, as even hits which only graze the opponent can cause substantial damage. My goal was to find out how exactly can Hitmonchan learn how to punch so well, and after a lot of research I think I found my answer. Its undying motivation and mountainous habitat allows it to train relentlessly to hone its punching skills. Their training includes pummeling rocks until they crumble and running up mountains to train their cardiovascular fitness. An ancient myth states that Hitmonchan has the spirit of a boxer, and with that spirit it never gives up. Should this be true, it definitely explains why Hitmonchan can punch so well, having characteristics of a world champion boxer. When I first saw Hitmonchan, I wondered how this Pokémon is a male-only species. Then I wondered how such a species could survive in a world of Pokémon with super speed, energy beams, or even such amazing hand-eye coordination that they would be able to avoid even a black belt's attacks. When one realizes how well equipped Hitmonchan is, that person will understand why it is, in fact, a fierce contender. From numerous studies, from simple eye observations to precise timekeeping, several theories have been produced about this punching Pokémon. For example, it is rumored that a single touch of the fists of a Hitmonchan will cause a burn, which I was too afraid to test, although that may be a collective effect from an indefinite number of punches performed in an instant. There are many other theories and facts about Hitmonchan, such as its ability to punch through concrete, or that it needs to rest after a mere 3 minutes of intense fighting. But to be honest, when it's punching dozens of times a second, nothing should theoretically last for more than 30 seconds, at best. Sadly, my equipment is unable to prove or reject any of them, because Hitmonchan keeps breaking them. Using fists in battle is not a novel idea. Humans have been doing this since the dawn of time. In fact, it's become instinct for humans to see a clenched fist as a universal response for feeling threatened. Much like a smile, a laugh, and raising open-palmed hands are symbols that are understood around the world, a fist is understood just as well, if not better, due to the innate response of defense. And no Pokémon has studied fighting with fists more thoroughly than Hitmonchan. Despite its incredibly flabby arms, it's estimated that Hitmonchan can punch faster than is visible to the naked eye. I much prefer to use that definition over the classic faster than a bullet train Pokédex entry. The fastest bullet train recorded runs at around 185 miles per hour, while an average punch can be well over 700 miles per hour. Furthermore, it is interesting to note that Hitmonchan spins its fists while punching. I'd imagine that this is similar to a human fist rotating from parallel to perpendicular, but since Hitmonchan punches at a much greater speed, the result of the twist might have expounded effects. That small flick of the wrist might occur at such a high speed that it allows Hitmonchan to learn rapid spin by punching away the hazards. Regardless of my harebrained theories, Hitmonchan is a force to be reckoned with thanks to its mastery of one of the most ancient fighting techniques. Is one of the most terrifying Pokémon to face in the wild, preying upon Piloswine and Solrock alike. It eats with the mouth on its stomach by smashing its prey into the ground with its massive weight. Even the offspring of such a monster must be pretty scary too, right? Well, not exactly. A simple observation of Beldum or Metang will yield no organ that can be used to consume things. Many scientists believe that Metagross's mouth is formed when two Metang fuse together. If this is the case, then, how do Beldum and Metang even exist? It appears that Beldum and Metang are massive energy storage units. At birth, Beldum contain a massive amount of energy, 99% of which is saved to be used toward evolution. Beldum are somewhat unstable, however, and sometimes lose all of this energy. Upon fusing with another Beldum, however, it only needs to store about 25% of this original energy. It also gains tiny holes in its metal that allow it to take in oxygen, water, and particulate matter in the air. Metang begins to grow larger at this stage in preparation for fusion with another Metang. Upon fusion, Metagross keeps these tiny pores but uses them only for oxygen. Its newly formed mouth and surprisingly complex digestive system take care of the rest. Metagross's evolution line is truly marvelous. Metagross's intelligence has been equated to that of a supercomputer, and certainly, if the complexity of its genome offers any indication, this is not difficult to imagine. Metagross's success can largely be linked to its extremely complex life cycle, which involves some form of double gamete fusion. The following model was developed to explain the phenomenon. Metagross reproduction, poorly understood though it is, produces haploid spores that develop into fully functional Beldum. These gametic organisms can live quite happily in the wild, though with limited capabilities, and of the four that are produced in the meiotic reproduction, there are four types: alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Alpha and beta Beldum fuse to form alpha-beta Metang, while gamma and delta fuse to form gamma-delta Metang. This has no bearing on their morphology, but affects the eventual Metagross. An alpha-beta Metang can only fuse with a gamma-delta Metang that is not from the same original parent Metagross. Once these Metang fuse, the body is divided up by brain, such that the alpha brain coordinates perception and knowledge retention, the beta brain coordinates logic and mathematical computation, the gamma brain coordinates intuition and deduction, and the delta brain coordinates all other bodily functions. Even after fusion, it is estimated that it takes at least a month before the Metagross is fully mature and can start producing its own offspring. Interestingly, while Metagross is most commonly associated with Hoenn thanks to the patronage of its former champion, Steven, it is in fact endemic to Unova, where a small native population resides in the giant chasm, although research specimens of Beldum have been known to escape in the past, where they have been quickly wiped out. Unfortunately, while Metagross is a formidable organism indeed, its development is so long and time-consuming that it is quite unsuitable for any region other than the one that it developed in, where it has no natural competition. Pilar's wine, and Delibird, Solrock, and Lunatone provide an ample prey source. When tested in any region other than the giant chasm, the Beldum gamets are wiped out within days. Indeed, although Metagross release thousands of Beldum spores, less than 1% of them go on to form a Metagross. And when you consider that it takes 4 Beldum to make a Metagross, this is quite alarmingly wasteful. It is also notable that the giant chasm is one of the few places in the world containing wild Ditto, which is intriguing considering that Metagross can only breed in captivity when Ditto are present. Could it be that the Ditto are necessary for Metagross reproduction, and why is this the case? The research, as ever, is ongoing. Through vigorous research, we have identified that 2 Beldum form a Metang, but the scientific knowledge of how this happens is still unknown. I ponder the question of why is it that there only needs to be 2 Beldum to form a Metang? If 3 Beldum fused to create a Metang, would it be stronger than a 2 Beldum Metang? I researched and experimented endlessly to discover the answers to my question, and I believe I have come to a sound explanation. All Beldum possess an electrical charge. This charge is the same for all Beldum. These charges prefer to be with another of the same charge, which is why the Beldum form. Once 2 Beldum form, the charges are satisfied, and no longer have the need to search out more of the same charges, which is why only 2 Beldum form a Metang. Beldum and its family are a strange batch of Pokémon in that they fuse together to evolve. 2 Beldum are required to electromagnetically bind and form a Metang, while 2 Metang are required to bind to form a Metagross. As we can see, 4 Beldum are required to fuse to attain a Metagross. This raises a few questions in my mind, though. For one, can these Pokémon fuse at will? Or is there a special force driving the evolution? It may be possible that the stronger a Beldum gets, the more powerful its electromagnetic field becomes, and the more easily it can bind to another Beldum. The same may be true for Metang. One needs to note that while these Pokémon fuse, their internal organs may not. It has been documented that Metagross has 4 brains, 1 from each Beldum. Scientists are currently wondering how Beldum can combine to form a Metagross, considering 4 Beldum are not near the size of 1 Metagross. One popular theory suggests that Beldum uses its magnetic powers to attract scrap metal and form parts of the body of Metang, who in turn does the same for Metagross. Another question that some have raised is whether or not it is possible to make a Metagross directly from 4 Beldum. Scientists are currently subjecting Beldum to intense amounts of electromagnetic waves to see if they can directly bind together to form a Metagross. Though this research is supposedly top secret and dangerous, possibly the single most bizarre evolutionary method to date, Shellder and Slowpoke are a particularly noteworthy example of chimeric evolution, a fusion of 2 individuals to form an entirely new, evolved form. Advanced horizontal gene transfer, if you like. However, what is special about these 2 is that they are entirely different species, where Magneton is merely a simple colonial organism. Slowbro and Slowking are both much more than a symbiosis. Indeed, it would not be unreasonable to describe it as a chimera, although admittedly the center of neural activity is still up for debate. This has led some to propose that Slowpoke and Shellder should be classified as a single species, that they have adopted the function of being, effectively, very large gamets, and that Cloyster exists purely as a sort of sperm factory, producing more Shellder for the continued survival of the species. However, one cannot adopt such a simple explanation too readily, as it ignores a number of crucial pieces of evidence. Fossil evidence makes it clear that shelder and slowpoke, whatever they are now, were once separate species, and follow entirely different evolutionary descents. More importantly, slowpoke and shelder are rarely, if ever, found in the same areas, meaning that an encounter is often more likely due to chance than design, although it is possible that certain places, such as the Seafoam Islands and Route 205, are like breeding grounds. As the Sargasso Sea is to European eels. A more likely explanation for the above, however, has surfaced recently in comparing the ribosomal RNA sequences of slowbro shells and shelder, in that the slowbro shell may actually be a new, parallel evolution for shelder, brought about by enzyme-linked morphological changes initiated by slowpoke sap, which is entirely parasitic, and is forced to live alongside its host owing to its slow defensive stats, manipulating it like some malevolent puppet master, and enhancing its psychic capabilities. Certainly it could offer an explanation as to why Slowking appears to possess such significantly developed mental capabilities compared to its prior and parallel forms. Slowpoke's evolution is quite odd by common evolution standards. After a shelder attaches itself to slowpoke, the two begin to live together in a symbiotic relationship. Depending on where shelder sinks its teeth in, slowpoke will either evolve into a slowbro, on the tail, or a slowking, on the head. In both cases, shelder suddenly becomes elongated and gray, with spiny protrusions. The two are able to continue living symbiotically because slowbro and slowking release sap from their glands, feeding the shelder they house. Interestingly enough, this sap is the same ingredient that makes slowpoke tail a hot commodity. Scientists have attempted to undo this evolution by removing the shelder from slowbro or slowking. However, after extensive testing, they have concluded that removing this shelder is impossible, as the slowbro's tail becomes elongated during the evolution and spirals around inside of shelder. The inside of shelder's shell also becomes a spiral maze, making it difficult to remove. In slowking's case, the shelder upon its head clamps on so hard that shelder can only be removed if the will of a partner permits it to. One might notice that slowking's psychic powers are enhanced by the jewel upon its crown, which actually happens to be a power that shelder gains through this evolution. Once the shelder bites onto a slowpoke's tail, its poison enters the slowpoke's body. At first the toxin hurts the slowpoke, causing him to be weak. After a while, the slowpoke begins to resist the toxin and actually gains bulk and better defenses because of the toxin, along with increased pain resistance. This is one of many reasons why shelder benefits slowpoke. After evolution, slowbro must change the way it obtains food since it can no longer use its tail to fish. Slowbro has been observed burying itself in the sand with its tail out. When an appropriate sea creature passes by, the slowbro suddenly bounces out of the sand with all of its might and agility, which isn't much, and eats its prey, which could range from unsuspecting crabapie or even other shelder. Slowpoke and shelder's strange evolution is fascinating and unpredictable. Will shelder bite slowpoke's head or tail? Slowpoke's sap glands are, in fact, only found in these areas, a sign that slowpoke evolved in this manner to avoid shelder biting anywhere that would greatly restrict movement. Slowpoke's ability to regrow its tail is a similar adaptation in that it aids evolution. Unlike the glands, its regenerative qualities developed in response to predators such as basculin that would snatch the tail. Some slowpoke have gained the ability to regrow their tails in minutes. Hence the regenerator ability designation. Slowpoke's tail in particular brings a heavy moral debate to the table. Quite literally. Slowpoke meat is often touted as tender and quite juicy. Only Kanto and Johto have an ample supply of slowpoke, however. Scattered farms there provide both premium slowpoke steak and syrup made from slowpoke sap. The sale of the tails, however, is highly contested. While they are quite the delicacy, cutting off the tails is excruciatingly painful. The effect of repeated tail removal is even noticeable by eating slowpoke meat. Repeated tail removal causes such stress to the slowpoke that the meat turns bitter. A series of public protests led the sale of the tails to be banned in several large cities in Johto, while being banned entirely in Kanto. Nevertheless, organizations such as Team Rocket continue to sell the tails through the black market. The international police have been investigating these sales, but we can only hope the poor slowpoke can keep their tails. There have been many cases of Pokémon being influenced by humanity. For example, Grimer and Mewtwo literally did not exist before the Industrial Revolution, and Nosepass only recently developed an evolution into Probopass, mimicking Mario in a desperate cry to be loved instead of being forgotten. It didn't work. However, of all of the developments in Pokémon species alongside the influence of humanity, Jinx's is certainly the most disturbing. It used to be that when Jinx had a baby, it was mature and ready for responsibility and battle in just a couple of weeks. But recently, its evolutionary chain has undergone a frightening mutation. Nobody knows exactly why, but my theory is that Smoochum have come into existence as a result of human interference with the Pokémon breeding process. As soon as we discovered eggs, we began to pamper baby Jinx as we would our own daughters, and the results quickly went downhill. Now, Smoochum remains a weak, dependent baby until its 30s, a frightening reflection on all too much of the current generation of young adults. Even more disturbing, though, are its large lips and seductive pose. Though it is not yet ready for responsibility, it has also mirrored the trend in human society of sexualizing younger and younger girls. Perhaps Jinx's human-like form has made it easy to forget, but she is not one of us and we need to stop disturbing her species. Unless you want to soon discover she has an evolution which only knows the move Amnesia and plays bingo on Thursdays. The Kiss Pokémon Smoochum is one of the baby Pokémon which most closely resembles its evolution, Jinx. Its discovery was relatively straightforward. Once researchers made progress with controlled breeding, Smoochum was one of the first new baby Pokémon found. The reason why Smoochum wasn't discovered until after this fact is because they are incredibly rare in the wild. This is due to the overprotective nature and the fascinating social strata of the Jinx. Jinx are very self-conscious Pokémon, their appearance is of the utmost importance to them, and this applies doubly for their children. Jinx will rarely let their Smoochum out because these children have not yet learned the rules of their society and would likely embarrass the family with their uneducated behavior. This behavior is seen nowhere else in the world, and its origins are yet to be found. By the time a Smoochum has matured enough to become a true, visible part of its society, it has usually acquired enough experience to evolve. Thus, to see a Smoochum in the wild implies it is very mature for its age, or it has been separated from its parents. The little baby divas of the Pokémon world. These little lipped rascals are known to have a kisser twice as sensitive as the standard human. If anyone wonders why Jinx can be so outgoing and open to relationships, look no further than its baby form. A Smoochum will kiss anything with its lips to understand it, to the point of smothering it to death. While it is an ice type, the lips are also the warmest part of Smoochum's body and are the most receptive part to release Smoochum's psychic powers. This baby may have more to reveal to us with how it can extend its psychic powers from its lips to physical movements as a Jinx, but I'm not going near either of these two. They are not the type of women I am into. Smoochum is a bizarre Pokémon whichever way you look at it, a babymon that would prefer to go around kissing things. This is clearly a trait it picked up off its fully evolved form, Jinx, as it shares the signature move Lovely Kiss. It is theorized that Smoochum remained undiscovered for years as wild Jinx would hide their eggs in crevasses in order to shield them from predators. The baby Smoochum would then not leave their crevasse until they were fit enough to survive in the wild, whilst their mother brought them food from the world above in the meantime. It is not known how Jinx scale these crevasses, but many scientists believe that Jinx's skirt-like attire becomes charged and the resulting forces give it a gecko effect on the ice. This level of maternal care shown is the reason that many illustrious poke breeders recommend that baby smoochum should not leave the attention of the trainer until they physically mature enough to cope with the stresses of the outside world. Looking at a Munchlux's belly will tell you everything you need to know about its affinity for food. To keep it happy, you almost need to feed it its own body weight in order to fill its daily quota. This tends to be a Herculean task and often puts off many trainers from actually raising the cute balls of lard. However, a recent discovery found that a Munchlux's evolution into Snorlax is linked to its happiness. Now, how do you keep a Munchlux happy? Not the trickiest problem you will ever come across. When a Munchlux has eaten its fill, its cells have enough energy to divide at a rapid speed. This leads to huge change in size and turns your cute little Munchlux into the Goliath that is Snorlax. However, that's not where the avid Snorlax trainer's problems end. Snorlax, despite sleeping for a large majority of the day, consume much more food than any Munchlux. So, keep your poke dollars in mind before you set out on attaining a Snorlax. It may be a formidable battler and an excellent mattress, but you might need to hire a chef to follow you in order to keep a Munchlux or Snorlax truly happy. Bat, being the fluffy ball it is, has swayed many trainers into adding it onto their team. Many look forward to the task of raising it carefully and tenderly so that it may one day evolve into Swoobat as a product of friendship and care, and a final testimony to the bond between its trainer. Or rather, that's the allure of it. Despite the skepticism from a majority of Pokémon breeders, the reality isn't as cuddly as Bat's furry hide. Bat are, unlike their Zubat brethren, psychic beings, and are in need of neurological stimulus if they are to mature properly. But being the cave dwellers they are, they rarely come in contact with other sentient beings on a longer basis, and intelligent species are even rarer. So when it becomes captured by a traveling trainer, it's actually a good turn of events, as it now has a perfectly fine mind to harvest energy from. Granted, it takes a long time for it to establish a firm connection to its owner's cerebral network, which is directly proportional to the affinity between the two. As their trust grows stronger, Bat's infiltration goes deeper. Eventually, the connection will be strong enough to support a direct absorption of the trainer's emotive surplus, thus giving Bat what it has always lacked, feelings. While they may not seem like it, Bat are purely objective creatures, where any behavior reminiscent of happiness can be attributed to mimicry. But with this emotional download, they have a tangible blueprint to replicate indefinitely within their own mind, causing them to evolve into the lovable Swoobat. While ordinary trainers have nothing to worry about concerning this one-time transfer, continuous breeding of these creatures is not recommended, as many breeders have developed apathy as a result. Friendship evolutions are some of the most bizarre evolution trends known to Pokémon for the sheer number of variations in evolution that are produced. Patterns like those seen in baby evolutions are sharply contrasted by the results of Bummer's studies with Bat. For example, take two examples that are nearly polar opposites, Swadloon and Golbat. Swaddle is given its first set of clothes by its parent Leavanny. It eventually evolves into the perpetually glum Swadloon. It can stay in this phase permanently, but its mood can gradually increase. When it reaches an emotional trigger point, such as the kindness of a Leavanny or the formation of a bond to its trainer, it releases a rush of endorphins that can often trigger evolution. Golbat, on the other hand, is a cold-hearted and cruel Pokémon, known to even directly attack inexperienced trainers and leave them for dead. For years, the general public believed that Golbat was the end-all, the all of cruelty. Suddenly, a team of researchers discovered Crobat, which immediately gave its researchers a sort of flying hug. Further studies confirmed that this was indeed a friendship evolution. The reveal of these studies shocked the world. How could a cruel creature such as Golbat evolve by friendship? Many scientists now believe that Golbat's evolution is triggered by the brain in a sort of epiphany. Golbat tend to believe that the anger inside them is their source of happiness, and they live their lives savagely attacking their prey for both sustenance and enjoyment. It is here where surprising parallels can be drawn between Swadloon and Golbat. It is believed that when Golbat witnesses an act of kindness, it can be so moved that it gives up its old emotions and unlocks its true potential. As wonderful as this theory is, the only part that can be proven is the brutality of Golbat's nature, and the truth about its evolution to Crobat is still a scientific mystery. Riolu is a Pokémon well known for being extremely amicable and willing to help anyone to the best of its abilities. Because of these grand qualities, it quickly became a favorite among budding Pokémon trainers. When interviewed, these trainers tend to say things along the lines of, "Riolu is my go-to Pokémon. It always delivers." Or "Riolu is my best pal. It's always right by my side." It's incredibly common for trainers to swoon with Riolu's praise, and this is almost all due to Riolu's unique ability to sense auras. Riolu has an innate power to see an almost unreadable force that all life seems to emanate. These auras can tell the reader any number of different things about the target, from its truest emotions, its goals, or even its fears. With this sense, Riolu will quickly connect with its trainer in ways many cannot hope to replicate. Since Riolu knows exactly how the trainer feels, what the trainer wants, and how he or she wants it done instinctively, a bond of reliability is cemented early. This bond only continues to grow stronger, and as it grows Riolu is able to explore its aura-sensing powers to greater and greater lengths. Riolu will only evolve once its aura-sensing powers have properly matured, but those powers will only mature once it has connected with a Pokémon trainer on a very deep level. It is through this almost symbiotic relationship that Riolu will finally evolve into Lucario. With its aura-sensing powers fully nurtured, a Lucario will know its trainer as well as they know themselves, and it's very common for a Lucario to be able to communicate directly with its trainer via telepathic thoughts. Extraordinarily strong Lucario have even been known to be able to communicate with total strangers due to their mastery of forms. Ability can be attributed to four main proteins, its core form protein, CFP, and three weather form proteins, WFP. A membrane-embedded protein complex detects any change in weather around cast form, and also gives it its gray color. In rain, the receptors can distinguish many droplets falling over cast form's entire body, preventing water submersion from activating the form change. This synthesizes WFPI, which eventually takes and unnoticeably dispels water. If rain continues, the protein expands with the help of other structures to form rain cast form. This mechanism prevents light splashes from causing changes. As rain stops falling, WFPI's water loss causes cast form to return normal. WFP2 detects hail and is most similar to WFPI. CFP coordinates the percussion of hail with small amounts of water uptake and activates WFP2 synthesis, which holds ice. When the external stimulus stops, so does transcription of WFP2. Finally, CFP can detect strong sunlight through a structure that is cleaved when exposed to a high intensity of UV light. This pathway causes WFP3 synthesis, which uses all but orange-red light to fuel reactions that give cast form its sunny form. As long as sunlight persists, WFP3 is created faster than it is broken down, otherwise, cast form changes back. The initial rumor of cast form's identity was that the National Hoenn Weather Institute had been working on an artificial Pokémon, which would be able to match the weather-inducing capabilities to those of legends. The actual announcement was therefore met with a vast amount of disappointment, even though the anticipation was ill-founded to begin with. Cast form was, and still is, a meteorological marvel whose purpose is to adapt instantly to changes in its environment. This would, in turn, hopefully improve the accuracy of weather forecasts, but since cast form would only change its structure the very moment the weather did, its ability to detect and predict the weather ultimately ended up to be lackluster at best. It's nonetheless a Pokémon, and its ability to not only induce but to also thrive in severe weather conditions has earned it a specialty to hold on to. plenty of laymen have repeatedly remarked that it lacks a customization for sandstorm, the fourth major weather condition, but to do so would be to forget how karst form is constructed. Despite being classified as a normal type, an immense portion of its body is composed of water, which makes it very sensitive to the humidity, air pressure and radiation around it. Rain, hail, and clear skies all affect those variables, triggering a shift within its internal balance large enough to warrant a molecular reorganization. In contrast, a sandstorm is merely harsh winds whipping up debris and particles, and only forces karst form to remain in its default state to escape further harm. The greatest terror in judgment to befall karst form is that it lacks a form for the presence of sandstorms. The ability due to its genetic structure would make it difficult, however recent events attempted to determine if such a form could be created. Geographically the sand form was thought to be useless as sandstorms are limited to the desert Route 111 of Hoenn. This changed dramatically during what is now called the Great Sandstorm Invasion, where numerous lavita were imported from Mount Silver to Hoenn. Aspiring trainers bought them en masse but could not control their final form. This resulted in many Tyrannita being set free, making Hoenn's weather system a bipolar nightmare. Sales of Go goggles spiked for weeks. After months of testing and modifications, all the Weather Institute was able to do was make weather ball a rock move during sandstorms. This had more to do with the fact that a large ball of air accumulating sand rather than the move-changing type. The modification was considered a massive money-consuming failure. To this day many karst form are given away to trainers that visit the Weather Institute in an attempt to boost tourism. There are no plans to update with a further form. Initial design concepts have suggested that such a form would resemble a sandcastle made by a 5-year-old child, begun around the same time as the Porygon project. The karst form project was a bizarre fusion of meteorology and genetic engineering designed to aid the ailing Weather Institute of Hoenn in their attempt to predict the weather. While this may seem a lot of wasted time and effort to throw at a somewhat minuscule problem, it should be remembered that Hoenn is, by virtue of its regional fauna, one of the regions most greatly beset by constantly changing and extreme weather conditions. Ironically, it has been noted that any attempt to predict the weather would be a fool's errand in any case, and also that Hoenn, at that point, did not have the vast economic problems of today, and had plenty of cash to throw around. Anyway, karst form is a relatively uninteresting Pokémon. It was designed for a specific, human purpose, rather than as a biological experiment. As such, little effort was expended on its ability to survive in the wild. Rather, the bulk of the effort was concentrated on its remarkable ability to change its fundamental genetic structure with the weather, a trait that no naturally occurring Pokémon possesses. While undoubtedly a great scientific experiment, there are concerns that karst form's existence is unethical, as it is essentially useless. However, scientists behind the work point to a very recent successful colony of karst form on Unova Route 6, an area notorious for its volatile weather conditions, where karst form's abilities give it a niche like native species such as Cloud is truly one of the most remarkable creatures in the world of Pokémon. It's not a novel idea to use sound in order to communicate. Many species of birds have evolved specialized calls that range from loud alarm calls to low mating chants. Even some primates utilized sound. It's estimated that some monkeys can howl for distances over 2 miles. In comparison, Exploud can make sounds that are heard for 6 miles. And you have to take into account that likely is a measurement of Exploud in the grasslands. Typically, they prefer to live in caves, which serve as nature's amplifiers. Exploud is a beast of unparalleled power when it comes to producing sound. When hidden in the bowels of a cave, I wouldn't be surprised if many other cave inhabitants went deaf. This brings into question the nature of how they communicate with one another. It would be intriguing to see if they also had modified hearing organs that allow them to direct in as much sound as is reasonable. If they had the standard hearing of a human, they would likely go deaf just by listening to themselves over the course of a day. Furthermore, you have to wonder how nearby Zubat handle this disruption in their echolocation. Hearing an Exploud's booming voice rebounded off the cave wall must be the audio equivalent of having a floodlight suddenly shone directly at your face. They must go absolutely nuts whenever Exploud is communicating. At first glance, Exploud seems to be an animated amplifier. Naturally, this cannot be true, as Exploud can make sounds without assistance. It's well documented that caves are Exploud's natural habitat, which implies how important Exploud's special powers are to it. Caves seem to be a perfect location for this loud Pokémon, as echoes are easily created within them. Their voice already carries approximately 6 to 7 miles on average, but within these hollow mountain halls, their roars can reach a staggering level of intensity. For purely scientific reasons, I found an Exploud that is unable to utilize sound moves. After observing this disabled Exploud in battle, I can safely say that Exploud would have a problem without a voice. Being 4 feet 11 inches and weighing only 185 pounds, Exploud doesn't exactly have the physiology to intimidate many Pokémon, with the exception of the Zubat within their caves. Sure, it could defend itself for a while against bigger Pokémon, but being unable to use its specialty would be a very large disadvantage to it. While a normal Exploud is probably too dangerous to research extensively, it's safe to assume that the vocal cords of an Exploud are incredibly advanced, far more than humans, able to make all sorts of noises, from a low-pitched squealing it uses to talk with fellow Exploud to deep roars able to shake land it uses in battle. Exploud's voice attacks are incredibly potent due to the nature of the sound created. The tubes from various parts of the specimen's body have the ability to create different noises. If you were to take a long cardboard tube and blow from the top, you would create only a single tone. As the many tubes that extend from Exploud's body are of different length, it's possible for it to immediately create many different tones from a single starting point. If we were to go further with our cardboard tube example, holes in the pipe walls allow us to create even more tones. Surprisingly, Exploud is capable of the same thing through pores that are able to expand and contract by will. So while Exploud is renowned for its incredibly loud noises, the species is also known to create very high-pitched sounds that can scare away intruders from its territory. These tubes are also a defense mechanism against its own species, and even itself. Imagine for a moment living in a house with people who only shout. It would give instant headaches and nobody would be able to sleep at all. To deal with this cacophonous mayhem, Exploud can remove sound vibrations from its body and pass them through another pipe. This ensures that it can live and thrive in caves with its fellow species without suffering too much from the sound wave bombardment. Exploud is a Pokémon well known for the loud sounds it emits. What really interests me about Exploud's screams is that Exploud doesn't perform these noises with its mouth alone. In fact, Exploud has many holes on its body which help to push out the sound along with its mouth, which is the reason why they can create such intense noise. This certainly makes Exploud's scream a dangerous attack. Not only because of the sheer volume, but also the fact that these holes cover Exploud's whole body, making the noise affect all Pokémon in close proximity, and not just those in front of it. It's hard to tell how Exploud can hear sounds, as it has no visible ears. But Exploud seems to be immune to any kind of harm or effect caused by sound moves thanks to its ability soundproof. While some Pokémon are known to utilize their voice in battles, such as Meletta, no other Pokémon uses it with such bellowing power like Exploud. With the holes on its body along with its spacious mouth, it can truly produce sound at an unrivaled pitch. Line is the only known species to display a trait otherwise found only in humans. The ability to undergo a sex change. Some researchers have cited this as evidence that Marill are as sentient as humans. These claims are largely unfounded, and furthermore, Azumarill looks far too stupid to possibly be intelligent. There must be an alternate explanation for this phenomenon, and I have devoted many personal resources to being its discoverer. Unfortunately, My researches yielded nothing fruitful on the question, but I did dissect close to 100 Azurill tails in pursuit of an answer. Analysis of the tail determined that its buoyant properties were imparted by a delicate concoction of a variety of hydrocarbons, many of which contained hydroxyl groups. If that stuff goes to their blood, it's no wonder they look so happy all the time. Azurill has long been neglected by Pokémon biologists, simply because it seems like such a terribly uninteresting Pokémon. However, Azurill exhibits many phenomena that aren't seen anywhere else in the Pokémon world. One such example of this is the ability to change gender on evolution. A theory proposed on the matter is that Azurill is not a fully mature species, meaning that it could possibly still contain all the necessary genetic information to create any type of Marill. This also accounts for its normal type status as Azurill, being undeveloped. It does not have the capability to survive the drastic ocean and river currents. These recent theories have led many scientists to believe that Azurill could lead to a huge discovery in stem cell technology, as Azurill's body cells must have some kind of multipotency. Statistically, it's the weakest baby Pokémon currently known. This was also one of the first babies to be discovered through the incense method of breeding, and as such it is believed Azurill come into this world with severe physical and mental deficiencies. Some major mysteries are why the sea incense is vital to its creation, and why is it that Azurill is a normal type despite needing the scent of the sea to even be created? One possible explanation is that Marill are freshwater species but centuries past were sea creatures. Seawater does do mysterious things to both Pokémon and people. There are reasons you are told not to drink it as a child. Within the tail of the Azurill, there are also nutrients that are required for it to develop. This may be the key for why Azurill can change type upon evolution. Researchers have attempted to extract these nutrients to artificially modify the types of other Pokémon. One was reportedly vying for a water dragon Gyarados, but to no avail, as while Azurill may be two small blobs connected by a thin black cord-like tail, it has a pure power ability that should not be underestimated. Azurill is a Pokémon which has baffled the greatest Pokémon minds of our time. You are all aware of the rare trait Azurill possesses, it being one of the few Pokémon to completely change its typing upon evolution. But what if I told you there was a far odder trait that Azurill possessed? For no apparent reason, 1 out of every 3 female Azurill will evolve into male Marill. That's right, Azurill has the potential to change its gender as well as its typing. This anomaly has been studied over and over by professors across the globe, and they've yet to find a reason for why it happens. The leading theory claims that the chemicals that promote its change of typing during evolution may also have an effect on its gender change. The afterthought of Nincada's evolution seems like it is the runt of the litter. With 1 hit point, even things like wild Rattata seem to have the edge over this weakling. Despite this, the sheer numbers of wild Shedinja seems to indicate that this is a species of Pokémon that is defying all odds. Shedinja owes its evolutionary success to its ability, Wonder Guard. Wonder Guard prevents the angelic Pokémon from being attacked in the wild, unless it is the recipient of a super effective move. This allows Shedinja to roam freely around grasslands and wastelands, where there are many normal-type Pokémon that cannot even lay a scratch on it. It is easy to conclude that Shedinja would be highly endangered, or even extinct, if not for its ability. There's only reason anyone would ever use Shedinja, and that reason is its radical little halo. I mean, look at it, just hovering over its head, looking all angelic. What? Oh, sorry, folks, my editors are telling me that's not the reason why people use Shedinja. According to this paper I'm being handed, it's used because of its ability, Wonder Guard. It says here Wonder Guard makes it so that only super effective moves will damage Shedinja. That's way overpowered. Seriously, Game Freak, why would you make such an ability? Way to kill competitive Pokémon. Regardless, I'm sure we've rightfully banned it from any real competition. This is embarrassing. I'm being told I've got this wrong yet again. It appears that even with this overpowered sounding ability, Shedinja has been a member of our never-used tier for the past 2 generations. That is interesting, considering this is a Pokémon who essentially has 12 immunities. It should have free switch-ins galore. Oh, I see. Shedinja has a max HP of 1. Yes, that's not a typo. Shedinja can have no more than a single point of health. Plus, it looks like Wonder Guard doesn't save this bug-type Pokémon from entry hazards, like Stealth Rock, and passive damage from weather like Sandstorm. Shedinja is certainly a rarity in the Pokémon world, coming into existence through strange circumstances, having literally 1 horsepower, and owning a one-of-a-kind ability in Wonder Guard. Wonder Guard nullifies the damage of any type not super effective against it, and with the typing of Bug, Ghost, a mere 5 types can damage Shedinja. Sadly, they're pretty common types. Rock and fire types come to mind. Shedinja certainly has problems, being immobile, hollow, and probably addicted to meth. Jokes aside, an immobile, empty shell isn't necessarily the most joyous Pokémon. You would think with wings, he would be mobile, but jokes on him, those aren't wings. That's his back torn out to let the real Pokémon, Ninjask, free. So having the ability to not be hurt by a majority of attacks in the game is probably its only positive in life. Oh, don't forget, status still kills him. In battle, Shedinja's ability should, wait. Stop. Why are you using Shedinja? This is not Hackman's. Shedinja is blessed with the greatest ability in the world of Pokémon. Any other Pokémon could only dream of having the Wonder Guard ability. This is because Wonder Guard gives Shedinja an immunity to every single move that can't hit it super effectively. Scientists are still not entirely sure how Shedinja does this. Attacks just seem to bounce off Shedinja's body unless they're super effective. Entry hazards, or damage from weather effects like hail and sand. Wonder Guard would be a godsend to any Pokémon, especially Sableye and Spiritomb, who carry no weaknesses, because it would give them a huge defensive buff, but unfortunately for Shedinja, due to it being just a lifeless carcass of a Ninjask, any super effective hit or residual damage from entry hazards and weather effects will knock it out immediately. So to sum this up, Wonder Guard is a very good ability, but on Shedinja all it does is save it from being the most hilariously weak Pokémon ever to exist. Shedinja is also rumored to have another special ability, stating that any human that looks into the crevice on its back will lose their soul. However, this myth has never been proven, and I believe that the hole in Shedinja's back is only there because Nincada had to break out of its old skin when turning into Ninja. Jellicent appears to be a non-threatening Pokémon, it happens to be a fierce predator. Jellicent poisons its potential meal and drags it into its hidden underwater caves, allowing it and its offspring to consume it without fear of other predators attacking. Can such a cute Pokémon do this? Jellicent happens to have microscopic harpoon-like structures around the outside of its body called nematocysts. When Jellicent touches its prey, the nematocysts shoot out of its body and poison its prey. Jellicent in different regions have adapted different types of toxins to capture the prey. Humans are looking for an antitoxin. Jellicent gather around the tropical coasts during the spring to reproduce. With the increased number of Jellicent, humans have had more encounters with the Pokémon. On average 10 people a year are severely injured by Jellicent. With the death of youngster Joey and his beloved Rattata, the public has become severely afraid of the ocean. Hopefully with new advances in Jellicent antitoxin, people will be able to swim in the ocean without fear of Jellicent. Nova's Chargestone Cave lies an area where even the most powerful Pokémon trainer cannot reach. It is completely cut off from the rest of the cave, and can only be accessed by rappelling from the top of the lowest available floor. In this deep well, huge colonies of Gigalith and ravenous Electros lurk in the shadows. How could any Pokémon exist in an environment so far away from the sun, you may ask? It's simple. The producers have another source of energy. It is believed that the deepest recesses of Chargestone Cave were created by the constant gnawing away of generations of Boldore, who survived on minerals and radiation, taken in from the cave's luminescent rocks. In the wild, it is energy such as this that gives Boldore the energy needed for evolution. Only in the deepest recesses of Chargestone Cave are there Boldore colonies completely cut off from the outside world, as most other Unova caves have a multitude of access areas where Boldore can take in sunlight. These Boldore have proved incredibly important in the study of trade evolutions, as the energy in their crystals can be easily measured. The energy expended in a Pokémon trade is incredible, being measured at almost 12,000 gigajoules. This is not only far above the requirements for Boldore to evolve, but incredibly wasteful. According to recent theories by celebrated Pokémon scholars, much of this spare energy is transferred to Pokeballs during a trade, and that energy can be further transferred to the Pokémon inside it. In the case of Boldore, and perhaps all other trade evolutions, with the possible exception of Carablast and Shelmet, the Pokémon can use this energy spike to trigger evolution. For now, there is little we know for certain about the process of trade evolution, but we can marvel at these amazing Pokémon. Haunter is a very mysterious Pokémon. It is well documented that simple battle experience evolves Ghastly into Haunter because as Ghastly grows stronger, its body, which can be made up of as much as 95% gas, becomes more and more corporeal. While Haunter isn't the most physical Pokémon, its form is more solid than any Ghastly. This finding would leave many to believe that in order to evolve Haunter into Gengar a similar method would have to occur, as Gengar is also much more corporeal than Haunter. But there has been no evidence that a Haunter can evolve through battle experience alone. It takes a rather odd solution to evolve it. Evolving a Haunter, as many of you will know, involves trading your loyal Ghost-type Pokémon to another fellow trainer. It is only through this method that you will be able to utilize Haunter to its full potential. Most pseudo-intellectuals will tell you that it's obvious why Haunter evolves this way. Trading a Pokémon exposes it to a rare kind of radiation that is found during trades. But it has actually been found that a Haunter simply exposed to the radiation in a lab, minus the trading, will not evolve. Thus, the radiation is not truly the cause of evolution. There is a myth as to why Haunter evolves through trading. It is that as Haunter travels between the two trainers it is able to tap into the shadows, and the foul thoughts of them both. Haunter feed off these things and with twice as much to eat, it quickly gains strength and reaches evolution. Magoke and Gurjar are both strong fighters which dedicate their whole existence to the mastering of physical combat and blunt violence. Be it straight punches, quick throws, or thumb wars, they continuously strive to excel their skills, with a high metabolism to account for their strenuous activities. But given the strength they can build up from personal training alone, once they are caught or given to a trainer for the first time, they instantly bond with their new guardian, and it has been proven that these two fighters develop better under an overseeing presence. With that in mind, the fact that they evolve after being traded to a different trainer has for a long time been disputed. Neither Magoke nor Gurjar requires more energy absorbed from the transfer in order to evolve, as they're both saturated with power prior to their evolution. For that reason, many believe that their evolutionary trigger is instead of a psychological nature. This, too, has spurred a plethora of different theories. The trade could be seen as proof of their adulthood, where they no longer require the aid of their original trainer and are prepared to serve a new ally. The reverse is equally possible, where this sudden exchange causes them to evolve further, in hopes that their old master would have a change of heart and reclaim their services, which is often the case. There is, of course, another theory that their transformation is merely fueled by their anger and rage due to the sudden dismissal from their trainer, but the number of murder incidents related to both custody exchanges and Pokémon assaults aren't nearly as numerous to make a conclusive statement. The fact remains that a Pokémon trade is the right kind of stimulus required for their final form, and it has been a major boon to trainer interaction ever since. The Abra line of evolution is one of great interest to scientists and Pokémon professors. Often thought to be the most intelligent Pokémon going, it is constantly wondered why Abra even evolves at all. With its ability to teleport away from danger, most wild Abra are generally untouchable by the region's apex predator. It is thought that Abra and Kadabra's evolution comes from a desire to attain more knowledge, further their intellect, and therefore further their psychic powers. Kadabra is not a particularly physically powerful Pokémon, therefore it requires the energy impulse from the trade with another trainer to combine with its huge psychic power. This, coupled with the aforementioned desire to attain more information, catalyzes the transformation of Kadabra into a Alakazam. This evolution is thought to be the most energy-rich and expensive evolution in the entire Pokémon world. Another theory is that Alakazam is the antithesis of another trade-linked evolution Pokémon, Macamp. Some believe that these two evolutionary lines have been evolving side by side for generations, constantly trying to outdo each other. An evolutionary battle of brains and brawn seems to have developed, with both lines striving for the ultimate final form. In Alakazam's case, this final form requires the input of energy that can seemingly only come from a trade with another trainer. Kadabra trades are one of the most sought after in the world, and people have been known to pay thousands of Poke dollars for such a trade. Hog Pilazwine is valued by many people in Pokémon society. It has decent stats in battle supplemented by powerful moves such as Earthquake. Its fur is prized among high-income members of society for its surprisingly soft texture. It can pull a farmer's wagon when it has to, and in a pinch it tastes good, if a little juicy. There's one other thing about Pilazwine that stands out beside its ability. It can be taught the move Ancient Power through the mover learners scattered across the Pokémon world. It has been pointed out by many that genes can actually be reactivated when a Pokémon is taught a move in this manner. In this case, Pilazwine's genome is reactivated in so many places that it can be hard to keep track of them all. The necessary enzymes to read these genetic changes can't be created until Pilazwine levels up, when spare energy is readily available. At this point, Pilazwine's new genes are rapidly read and evolution occurs, creating the mammoth-like Momozwine. Momozwine do exist in the wild in the Giant Chasm, however. The Giant Chasm is an entirely different environment, and the circumstances are quite different. Momozwine may have evolved at first in the wild in response to the local Metagross population. To this day, clashes between Metagross and Momozwine are both common and violent, but not fatal, in nature. Momozwine's victory ensures that their offspring can also evolve into Momozwine. What's Pink has a huge appetite, and can coat a large variety of objects with slime. With the exception of unpleasing individuals you may know of, these traits are an accurate description of Lickitung, which is renowned for being a species whose biggest muscle can easily fit within its mouth cavity. Living a life where the main objective is to satisfy its daily hunger has worked out fairly well so far for this tongue twister. However, Lickitung is a slow creature, in more than one way. With a lagging tail, clumsy body, and slow reflexes, getting around the environment while also staying away from predators is one of the largest issues of its daily life. But rather than making use of their scrawny limbs, more and more specimens were discovered to use rollout to spin themselves away. But not as Lickitung. In a process which is still shrouded in mystery, any Lickitung knowing their move rollout can at any time evolve into a rounder form officially known as Lickilicky. With thinner arms and legs, along with a smaller tail, this ample gourmand is more suitable for rolling at higher speeds with less effort required. Researchers have theorized that this move activates many cognitive processes within the minds of Lickitung, which allows its body to prepare the accommodations to better adjust its proportions and bulk. It did, however, take a long time before a definite link between the move rollout and Lickilicky was clearly confirmed, thanks to trainers who trained this species. Granted, earlier versions of TMO4 enabled people to teach Lickitung rollout, and Move tutors in Hoenn also have documentations of the same accomplishment, but with no spontaneous evolution of Lickitung as a result. This has led many to believe that Lickitung's instincts play a large role in its development, and thus, directly teaching the move to it won't have the same effect. It's something they need to figure out on their own. Ipum is a Pokémon who has a very unique niche in the natural world. Due to its strong hand-like appendage on its tail, it lives mostly in wooded areas, using its tail to swing nimbly from tree to tree. It also uses its tail to nab fruits from the same trees where it lives. Its tail is used so often that its actual hands receive very little use. It is partly due to this disuse of its true hands that leads Ipum towards its evolution. You see, Ipum are actually extraordinarily inefficient creatures simply because they really only have one limb, their tail. It is used in all the work the Ipum does, from carrying for their young to protecting their territory. This inefficiency led to the eventual evolution of the Ipum, in what is one of the most interesting finds in the Pokémon world. It is so interesting to scientists because most Pokémon simply evolve as a means to grow. Think of it like aging for us humans, but the Ipum finally evolved because it made them more efficient. It was an evolution rarely seen in the Pokémon world. At some point, it is theorized, there was born an Ipum who learned the move Double Hit. This move, however, is much too difficult for any Ipum to properly perform as, again, it only has one suitable limb for attacking. But this Ipum endured and willed itself to master the move and soon evolved into Ambipum. This new form, with its two tails, is seen as a pre-adaptive trait, and the move Double Hit soon spread throughout the world's Ipum population. It is believed the first Ambipum originated in the Sinnoh region, somewhere near the Eternal Forest. It is really one of those species which shows how size obsession and selective breeding can together turn into a slippery slope. Plenty of observations have, to the joy of male enhancement salesmen everywhere, confirmed that the individual with the largest pincer wins the most lady crabs. It's a fact. But what's been less emphasized is that this social climate among these snipper colonies has resulted in males who have difficulties with their overall performance, as the sheer weight of that claw puts a strain on their bodies. They may hit like a truck, but they're also nimble as one. Ever seen a Kingler fight to Floatzel? It's a hilarious sight. Kingler are built tough. They are a Pokémon species that live in an unforgiving environment, where tides constantly crash down and shove them onto rocky shores. The delicate and meek perish in the hands of their more ambitious kin or from the relentless waves. Although its mighty pincers weigh them down, they are deceptively fast. They move in spurts and ambush their prey by surprise. Their large pincers also give Kingler a surprising wingspan, allowing them to clamp down on Pokémon 6 feet away from its body. The vice grip is nigh unbreakable, allowing their smaller and more dexterous claw to start slicing through skin and muscle. Against a more resilient or sturdy prey, Kingler may slam it to the ground to knock it unconscious. Their powerful legs can also pin their food down while feeding. Kingler can even overcome Cloyster with incessant bludgeoning of their enormous claw, although many Kingler usually give up before succeeding in the kill. Kingler are aggressive toward each other, they only know how to communicate with one another through the snapping and slamming of their pincers, mostly for intimidation. Male Kingler would pound their large pincer to the ground to win the approval of females. Kingler's large pincer is a keystone to its survival. The smaller pincer begins growing when Kingler loses its large pincer due to wear and tear from crab fights or clubbing too many Cloyster. A small pincer would emerge from the ligament that just lost its large pincer. Kingler come out bigger after each molting period. Yes, size matters. In the non-Pokémon world, the most famous example of extreme asymmetric clawed morphism is seen in the fiddler crab, whose males also possess an enormous claw the length of the carapace. The rapid eating movements of the smaller claw make it look like it's playing a fiddle on the bigger one. However, the males use this thin fiddle to show off to females and spar with other males for mating rights. In other words, The fiddler's fiddle is used for the crab manifestation of penis fencing. In reality, because crabs mix gametes outside the body, there is no penis, so I guess they have reason to try to compensate, the eternal male condition of mind's bigger egotism. However, unlike the fiddler crab, Kingula have no visible sexual dimorphism, with the females also possessing the enlarged left claw. So, either the claws were specialized for a different purpose, or female Kingula have massive penis envy. Moving away from crabs in search of an explanation, one will find that specialized claws are not at all uncommon adaptations in crustaceans. For instance, lobsters use a variety of different claw types for different tasks. They have a thinner cutter claw used for tearing through meat and limbs or holding prey down, and a thick crusher claw used for smashing the shells of crabs and other shellfish. They also have smaller claws on their second and third pairs of legs used for neatly and accurately rasping meat off of shell or bone, and bringing them to the mouth. Fiddler crabs use their smaller claws for this fine work. Looking at Kingula's claws, it's safe to say that unlike the thin and ornamental fiddle of the fiddler crab, Kingula's thick, large, muscular claw was meant for smashing, the extreme version of the lobster's crusher, only with 10,000 extra horses. This beast was clearly meant for smashing through some serious shellfish. Most likely, Kingula's massive claw and resulting 130 base attack were evolved for bashing through shell's tough shells of base 100 defense, a task it's quite effective at in the Seafoam Islands where both species were initially discovered. It's quite literally an incredible crab armor. Since Kingula's claws are so impressive, often people forget about its skeleton. Kingula has an exoskeleton, external skeleton, made of chitin. This exoskeleton is so strong, it is able to reflect bullets. In primitive times, people used the exoskeleton of Kingula to make armor to protect them. Over time, I questioned why is their skeleton so hard? I have come to this solution. A long time ago, Kingula and Crawdaunt lived in a similar area. Crawdaunt loved to fight and would challenge the Kingula. Because Kingula's claw is so heavy, Crawdaunt would usually kill the Kingula before the Kingula could raise the claw to attack. Eventually, all the softer-shelled Kingula died off, leaving only the Kingula with hard shells alive to reproduce and create a generation with even harder shells. Kingula is, or appears to be, a fairly bog-standard crustacean, if such a thing exists. Oddly, Kingula appear to be purely carnivorous, where one would expect such a creature to eat more or less anything it came across, in accordance with the relative difficulty of obtaining sufficient food and competition with other carnivorous Pokémon in the seas around most regions. Indeed, there was one particularly famous experiment performed which involved throwing Kingula into a saltwater pool covered by an algal bloom. Regrettably, the Kingula always fainted as soon as they touched the algae. The experiment has not been repeated. In any case, Kingula appear to be relatively specialized predators. It is one of the few Pokémon with the physical strength and tools necessary to break open the shells of well-protected Pokémon such as Shellder and Cloyster, which are certainly beyond the skills of such Pokémon as Seadra. However, this theory is not without its flaws, not least that in most regions, Kingula appear to live in entirely separate areas to their supposed shelled prey, with only Unova as a known exception. As such, it is more likely that native populations will feed more commonly on those universal fodders, Corsola, Magikarp, and Tentacool, while its ability to survive for longer without feeding would give it an advantage over other undersea predators such as Lantern and Seadra. Kingula will also encounter Staring, Horsey, and Chinchu in its natural habitat, but its great unwieldiness would almost certainly stamp out any hope it had of feeding on those particular creatures. Indeed, we must talk about Kingula's claw, as that is one of the most interesting things about it. While there is surprisingly little knowledge available on Kingula and its complex communication methods, tolerance of high salinity, and other vague observations made over the years, one particular point has been endlessly repeated, apparently without any further investigation, that Kingula has a 10,000 horsepower crushing force in its larger pincer. Leaving aside the bizarrely well-rounded number, we must give leave to question this value on a common-sense basis. A hydraulically operated jaws of life will rarely exceed 10 horsepower for the pump. Multiply that power by 1000, and if true, it's a wonder that King Allah's pincer does not shatter on impact. Certainly, I do not know of any organic molecule that could withstand such effect on the evolution of its aquatic friend. Mantike is certainly enigmatic. When the little fish is present next to Mantike, our manta ray friend evolves into Mantine, an even bigger manta ray. Oddly enough, all Mantine seem to have a remoraid clinging to their underside, cleaning the belly of debris and other fish. Thus, the relationship between Mantike and remoraid must contribute something to the evolutionary sequence. What can this be? Many of us should know that many Pokémon evolve when they are extremely happy. The endorphins that produce happiness in the brain are the same endorphins that we see released from Mantike's glands when a remoraid is nearby. It is possible that remoraid and Mantike bond in such a way that they make each other very happy, and this happiness is what causes Mantike to evolve. Scientists are currently researching whether producing this happiness, without a remoraid, can produce the same result, evolution. One of the strange things to note about Mantine is that remoraid never seems to leave Mantine's side. These remoraid never evolve, and apparently Mantine's presence seems to stunt their growth into octillery. Of course, an octillery cannot keep up with a Mantine, so it's possible that the remoraid itself enjoys sticking with Mantine so much that it prevents its own evolution. These two truly compose one of the more fascinating mysteries of the sea. A rare sight around the seas of Johto, Mantine biology was not properly explored at all until fairly recently, and as such, even the very existence of its juvenile form, Mantike, was unknown to most scholars. However, after researchers at Sinnoh were indeed able to identify and confirm its existence, in point of fact, it is quite literally as common as muck in Sinnoh. So you have to wonder how they didn't make the connection sooner. It became a hot research topic for its bizarre method of evolution, which involves the Pokémon remoraid, a bizarre fish best known for acting as a cleaner in underwater communities by biting away pieces of fungus and other potentially infectious pieces from larger organisms, and for undergoing some bizarre form of regressive evolution, reverting from a vertebrate fish to an invertebrate cephalopod form, octillery, after a sort of metamorphosis. The life cycle, then, is quite bizarre. It appears that Mantine congregate extensively in coastal areas, such as Undla Bay and the environs of Sunny Shore City, until they encounter a remoraid, at which point they will accompany the fish out to sea, evolving into a Mantine once sufficiently mature, which then migrates to their breeding grounds in Johto. The discrepancy between numbers indicates that very few Mantike survive the journey. After breeding, the females lay their eggs in the seabed and abandon them. Once the eggs hatch, the Mantike must make their way back to the coastal areas, where they will be safe from predators. Even so, large quantities of Mantike are a big part of the ocean food chain, so at least they're useful for something. Mantike and remoraid have a symbiotic relationship, meaning both of them benefit from living together. Mantike protects the small remoraid from being eaten by vicious Pokémon such as Sharpedo and Basculin. Remoraid also feeds off of the scraps of food that Mantike misses. Mantike benefits from having a remoraid around because the remoraid cleans and protects Mantike's body from diseases, allowing Mantike to focus on evolving into Mantine. There are some downsides for remoraid when choosing to live with a Mantike. Once a remoraid picks a Mantike to live with, it will always be with that Mantike for the rest of its life. Also, the remoraid loses its ability to evolve into octillery. The technicalities surrounding Mantike's evolution pose quite a dilemma for scientists. While the theory Harshaw brought up is currently the best explanation the scientific community has to offer, there are a number of things still not known all about it. What is known is that the odd prerequisite of a remoraid appears to be a vestige from prehistoric times, when common fish Pokémon such as remoraid were stronger and more intimidating. The protection Remoraid may have offered would allow the small Mantike to concentrate on evolution. After Mantike had evolved, the Remoraid would spend its life under the fin of the new Mantine, catching scraps from Mantine's meals. While Remoraid doesn't exactly offer this protection today, this behavior is seen in modern Mantike-Remoraid relationships. Remoraid won't attach to Mantike until it has evolved into Mantine. Regardless of the past, however, Remoraid's role in Mantike's evolution is still a fascinating topic of study. Populations have been rapidly declining across the world. Most of the species can be found in traveling swarms to protect themselves as a flock. As a Pokémon species, I love Farfetch'd, because they are delicious. Although there are now heavy fines for hunting them out of season, I did enjoy their tasty meat as a child in Kanto. The leek they carry just makes it so tempting to want to cook them rather than train them. But I digress. Trainers should train, love, and cherish their Farfetch'd and raise them into competent fighters. It gives the dark meat a great kick to it when added into a soup. Getting back to the point, Farfetch'd are very effective combatants of digestive problems when eaten on rotisserie. It's actually not even my fault that I want to eat these birds so much. Psychological studies have shown that Farfetch'd holding leeks look so much more appetizing. A follow-up study was performed and Farfetch'd were given pocket knives disguised as a leek. The Farfetch'd proved to look less tasty to predators and proved to be lethal in combat. The normal leek would only increase the critical hit ratio of a Farfetch'd, while the blades doubled the attack power and significantly increased the odds for landing a critical hit. While the research with the leek blades has ended and were removed, if Farfetch'd ever acquired even a remotely more powerful weapon, it would be a terrible force to behold. Making fun of Farfetch'd may be a pastime among people today, but Farfetch'd weren't always the butt of Pokémon jokes. There are many old legends pertaining to Farfetch'd's amazing prehensile wings grasping objects other than a useless stick, such as Skarmory feathers, Mamoswine tusks, and even Absol scythes. Because of this, scientists hypothesize that the weapon of a Farfetch'd is imprinted on birth. This led to an over-military project based around teaching newborn Farfetch'd to use weapons, such as assault rifles, then led by General Surge. However, because Farfetch'd greet their trainers by lightly using their stick, this translated to Farfetch'd lightly spraying bullets at their trainers' faces. With more human casualties than Farfetch'd casualties, the military considered this to be one of their most embarrassing projects ever, and demoted General Surge all the way down to lieutenant. Wow, I sure went off on a tangent. Anyways, Farfetch'd are among the most endangered species of Pokémon on the planet. Not only is a Farfetch'd stick almost completely useless versus its natural predators, they are also very slow flyers, which makes them easy targets for poachers. It doesn't help that Farfetch'd are among the most tasty Pokémon as well, so in 1996, the Kanto Congress passed the Farfetch'd Act, which set up farms so Farfetch'd meat could finally be legal. While this still failed to help Farfetch'd much from its natural predators, some breeders have been attempting to reintroduce Farfetch'd to the wild, and hey, at least we can now legally have a delicious roasted Farfetch'd at Thanksgiving dinner. Farfetch'd are well known to always be carrying some sort of stick. Whether it be just a branch off a tree or a vegetable, Farfetch'd are very fond of their stick and will defend it valiantly. Farfetch'd's wings are designed so it can hold its stick firmly, where each wing has multiple slits on the edge of it creating opposable fingers. Farfetch'd's official Pokédex entry states that it can't live without the stalk it holds. That's why it defends the stalk from attackers with its life. However, Farfetch'd are known to eat their sticks in emergency situations, although they immediately begin searching for a replacement. As humans, it seems weird how a Pokémon can be so attached to a lifeless object. I went out to do some research on Farfetch'd's strange obsession and to hopefully find out what exactly happened if Farfetch'd were to lose its stick. Don't worry, though, no Farfetch'd were harmed during my research. I discovered that the Farfetch'd's sticks are a symbol of honor, and any Farfetch'd without one is seen as an outcast, or insignificant if compared to other Farfetch'd with a stick. Seeing as the stick is also a Farfetch'd's primary weapon, a Farfetch'd wielding a stick can easily force a stickless Farfetch'd to do its bidding. I believe that the statement "it can't live without the stalk" is because of how some Farfetch'd become very depressed when at loss of a stick, and could end up dying prematurely due to the treatment from other Farfetch'd. We were supposed to research Marowak. However, it seems that Farfetch'd is much more dependent on its leek than Marowak its bone. Farfetch'd knows numerous moves which requires it to wield its stick appropriately, such as Leaf Blade and Fury Cutter, which really goes to show how versatile this Pokémon is with its chosen weapon. A possible reason Farfetch'd depends on its leek so much is that it's close to being born with it, despite this going against nearly every law of nature, from the law of gravity to the law of being born without having a plant placed in your arms. It's been seen before that when someone or something is introduced to something as a young gun, it tends to stick with it or them for the rest of their life, embedding that presence into each and every fiber of its being. Some wonder if Farfetch'd could survive without a leek, but let's face it, it can hardly survive even with a leek. Farfetch'd is so unequipped for combat that it's a wonder how they've managed to survive for so long. Thankfully, their mating ritual isn't shows of strength or endurance, but rather shows, dances, and fancy stick tricks to attract their mates. Sneasel is a highly specialized Pokémon that has adapted to every environment it is found in, be it the frigid northern roots of Sin or the warm grasslands surrounding Mount Silver. Sneasel often hunt in pairs, with one member distracting a target Pokémon while the other steals its eggs. Lone Sneasel are even known to ambush and kill small Pokémon like Delibird and Clefairy. It's fitting that a Pokémon like Sneasel would be one to evolve by unique means, level up while holding a Razor Claw at night. The timed evolution requirement is rather odd, and is believed to be related to radiation from the sun. During the day, the sun is more direct, while at night its light must reflect off of the moon. As for the impact of the item, the Razor Claw is composed of trace minerals and elements such as bismuth that are not normally found in a Sneasel's diet. The surge of energy caused by leveling up has been shown to have some effect on the Razor Claw, which causes a transfer of atoms between the item and the Pokémon and as a result triggers evolution. If a Sneasel holding a Razor Claw were to level up during the day, this atom transfer would still happen, but the higher levels of solar radiation would suppress evolution. It is believed that this is how both Sneasel and Weavile are able to learn Metal Claw by level up. If a Sneasel not holding any item levels up at night, it does not receive the trace elements required to evolve. Unfortunately, further testing on this subject is slow, as approaching a pair of Sneasel without a Skarmory partner or a suit of chainmail is quite risky indeed. Clamperl is a remarkable Pokémon in the sense that it possesses the ability to evolve into either a Huntail or a Gorbis. Having multiple potential evolutions is a relatively rare trait, with most Pokémon possessing a single evolutionary pathway. For Clamperl to possess this ability, the cells in its body must already have the ability to divide into Huntail cells and Gorbis cells. Whilst this is not complete totipotency, Clamperl's cells show remarkable versatility when compared with those of a Pokémon with a single evolutionary pathway. This means that Clamperl can react completely differently under specific situations, due its cells having stem cell-like properties. As a result of this, Clamperl is often the study of stem cell research in laboratories in order to combat many human diseases due to the aforementioned cell traits. The stimulus of a deep-sea tooth or deep-sea scale can lead to drastically different morphological changes. This is due to the fact that each item stimulates the production of different hormones, leading to cells producing very different proteins dependent on which item was used. This different protein production stimulates the evolution of Clamperl into either a Gorbis or a Huntail. Porygon was the first modern Pokémon ever invented by man. It was originally developed to assist scientists in cyberspace, a dimension it could literally travel to. Not long after its creation, work began on modifying the computerized duckling, and results soon followed. Porygon 2 was shown around the world as the foremost artificial Pokémon, and commercial companies began mass-producing the necessary upgrade used by trainers to evolve their own Porygon. It is around this time of mass production, rumor has it, that work began on an even newer upgrade for Porygon 2. It was many years before any word reached the public ear, but later the Global Space Administration began having unnatural bugs plague most of their satellites. There would be no outward signs of disturbances such as meteorites, yet these satellites would lose much of their functionality overnight. The culprit turned out to be a rogue Pokémon unknown until then, Porygon Z. It was soon captured by a crack team of astronauts and brought back for study. It shared most of its hardware with Porygon 2, except the software that allowed Porygon 2 to adapt and learn had been almost totally rewritten. This new program caused Porygon Z to act incredibly erratically, and also vastly increased its offensive capabilities. Investigators were able to find where the Pokémon had originated from: a group of hackers based in Sinnoh. They had tinkered with the tech found in the standard upgrade and used this new dubious disc to evolve a Porygon 2. Because of these hackers, upgrade has had numerous anti-tampering measures added to them. Rumor has it that copies of the original dubious disc exist, and many trainers will pay quite handsomely to have the offensive powerhouse Porygon Z on their teams. It was long believed that Magmar was the final stage of the Magby line, as it possessed decent base stats and a well-developed physique. But as Unova researchers discovered that even this lava duck could receive a boost from Eviolite, it was a definite proof that there were still untapped potential left within its genome. Many researchers tried anything to be the first to unlock its secret form, but to no avail. It was traded, befriended, exposed to every evolution stone imaginable, but no method created a response. So with most things, we had to find the answer within nature itself. The first Magmortar was found in an area adjacent to a supervolcano, which days before had ravaged the surrounding area. It was swiftly caught, studied, and then released back into the volcano along with a heat-resistant tracker. The tracker lasted for about an hour, as it only resisted degrees up to 3000 degrees F, but the research team managed to pinpoint its course and sent in several magma of their own in an attempt to lure this mysterious evolution back to the surface. When they returned, all of them had evolved into Magmortar, and thus it was quickly concluded that the immense thermal energy and properties of magma deep below the Earth's crust was the stimulus this fire dweller required. Granted, being within the vicinity of an active volcano was too much of a risk for amateur trainers who wanted their magma transformed, so a safer way to trigger their evolution was required. Some years later, the first magmarizers hit the market, which contained pulverized magma rocks and exothermic reagents, which together with the energy during Pokémon trades results in a burst of magma energy that triggers magma's process of evolution. At least according to the product Mantike is a rather interesting study. Like many other new species discovered after the strange Ezreal incident in Hoenn, Mantike can only be found if a Mantine is bred with a wave incense. Interestingly, however, it seems the only difference between Mantine and its baby is that the former is born with a Remoraid attached to its fin. Thus, when a Mantike levels up in the presence of a Remoraid, evolution quickly follows. Why does this only occur on level up? Every expert has their pet theory, but my hypothesis is that they behave like subatomic particles. The energy from leveling up is needed to overcome their mutual repulsion, but once they bond, the released energy is enough to trigger evolution. The mutualistic relationship that Mantike and Mantine share with Remoraid is one that has only recently been found by scientists. The bizarrely close bond that these two Pokémon share is cited as the reason why it is exceedingly difficult to actually find wild Mantike, especially in Kanto, Johto, and Hoenn. Remoraid are attracted to young Mantike like a Sharpedo is attracted to an open wound and will latch onto the youngster almost immediately. It is suggested that the shared power of these two sea-based Pokémon catalyzes the evolution of Mantike into Mantine, whilst also giving young Remoraid a safe haven from the predators of the deep. It is rare for a Mantike to reject a Remoraid, but it is theorized that this is the reason it is possible to find some wild Mantike and that these Mantike need a trainer to bring these two Pokémon together in their party. Not much is known for sure, but we can be certain that the futures of these two species are strongly linked. Mantike's evolution into Mantine is as mysterious as the method of its birth as an egg. To evolve, it requires a trainer to also own a Remoraid. The Mantike will evolve and receive a Remoraid, but not the same Remoraid that was in the trainer's party. It is always some entirely new wild Remoraid. In an isolated study, it was discovered that this trainer Remoraid pulls a mating call to a wild family of Remoraid to attach to this Mantike. The reason a trainer's Remoraid will never do this is because it believes it already has a Mantine in its own trainer. Thus, it would have no need to attach to another Mantine. This of course begs the question of what is truly gained in the Mantine-Remoraid relationship. Mantike is a baby Pokémon which may have the oddest evolution method in the entire Poke Kingdom. It must level up in the presence of a Remoraid owned by the trainer who hatched it. It's so odd because it only evolves when its trainer owns a Remoraid. If a Mantike interacts with wild Remoraid, evolution does not occur. The only theory as to why this happens is that Mantike are not creatures found in the wild. For an egg to carry a Mantike, the parent Mantine must be holding a wave incense. Incenses are peculiar items, but the main point is that they are not found in the wild. It takes a trainer introducing a wave incense to provide a Mantike. Mantine who live in the wild are constantly surrounded by a school of Remoraid, so when a natural birth occurs, a Remoraid instinctively goes to the newborn Mantine. It's believed the scent of the wave incense masks the scent of the newborn Mantine and no Remoraid goes to it, resulting in the birth of a Remoraid-less Mantike. This scent lingers on the Mantike, keeping any potential wild Remoraid away. However, with the affection of a trainer, a caught Remoraid can overcome the scent, ensuring the Mantike's natural evolution. Miniature bonsai tree Pokémon was first discovered by a trainer in Pyrite Town but was later catalogued in Sin as part of the National Dex. I was very excited to have a Pokémon tied to their region, but no researcher wanted to brave the desert to confirm that they were a natural species, so it was never to be. It is unknown why there are not more Bonsly within it is the ideal environment for their type, but their method of disguise is completely counterproductive to this. There are no plants in the wasteland, that is one possible explanation is that despite the ever-looming fear of being watered in greener environments, Bonsly still require a degree of moisture to enable them to cry. Within the sands of there is not enough moisture for Bonsly to effectively cry, which would explain why they are not an abundant species there. Bonsly is the pre-evolution of Sudowoodo, the imitation Pokémon. Sudowoodo's own discovery was mired by the fiasco surrounding its typing. It appears to be a tree yet it's actually a rock type. This comes from its nature as the imitation Pokémon. It survives in the wild by disguising itself as a grass-type Pokémon to avoid its natural enemies, water-type Pokémon. Now while Bonsly too appears to share the appearance of a grass-type Pokémon, it does not act like one. Sudowoodo takes its role as a tree very seriously, where Bonsly does not. Bonsly are rarely seen around any real shrubbery, preferring its more natural habitat of caves, deserts, or other mountainous regions. It is a rock-type Pokémon at heart, and it acts like one. This of course leads to more frequent encounters with water-type Pokémon which are eager to grow stronger in the wild. They seek out these weak rock types in order to grow. Because of this way of life, Bonsly will quickly begin learning to act more and more like grass types, and then when it has mastered the move Mimic will evolve into Sudowoodo. It will then leave its natural habitat and make its home in the nearest forest. Sudowoodo, it's a rock that looks like a tree to disguise itself from potential predators. In all, a clever, but boring, Pokémon. However, a much more interesting query is how its baby, Bonsly, came about. They only hatch when their parents are bred in captivity. Obviously, wild Sudowoodo do not run around holding man-made rock incenses, but it seems as though their proximity to mankind has affected their natural instinct for camouflage. While Sudowoodo get along just fine in nature as a tree, Bonsly bears an evolutionarily unfortunate resemblance to a potted plant, which is only a useful disguise in suburbia, where it remains until adulthood. How the incense carries the genetic information needed to change Sudowoodo's shape, and why it reverts upon learning the move Mimic, are not known. What is known is that, though Bonsly are cute, people using them as house pets have contributed to quite the invasive species problem. Far too many evolved Bonsly turned loose refuse to leave their hometowns, instead choosing to simply stand in the middle of the road and block traffic for weeks on end. Bonsly is one of the most unlikely Pokémon around, as its camouflage seemingly has no positive effect in its natural environment. Bonsly appears to take on the appearance of a potted angiosperm, a flowering plant, yet it is quite clear that potted plants simply do not exist naturally in the wild. This has led scientists to theorize that recently hatched wild Bonsly actually live in caves underground, rather than sticking out like a sore thumb in the wild. The Bonsly that we see in the wild are actually mature Bonsly that are ready to evolve into the much more powerful Sudowoodo. These Bonsly are powerful enough to deal with most of the threats of their natural environment, so they have clambered from their underground haven in order to seek experience in battle. Through this battling, they can go on to learn the move Mimic, which is necessary for the evolution process. Not much is known about this, but it can be assumed that it has something to do with improving the camouflage of the young Bonsly and thus giving it the means to evolve. Thought by many to be the most successful artificial Pokémon ever created. While not considered to be a true artificial Pokémon by some owing to its origins in an existing species, Mewtwo is still the earliest known species that owes its existence solely to human endeavor, as well as easily the most successful overall. It surpassed its genetic base in almost every way, becoming far faster and stronger than any Pokémon known to the scientists working on it, even so far as to develop a sentient intelligence and the ability to communicate with humans. Research on the latest batch, later put to sleep, has shown the capability of learning advanced level techniques such as Aura Sphere and Recover, mimicking the near limitless abilities of its base, though not to so significant an extent, as well as most recently, showing the capability to exceed all known psychic abilities with a newly discovered technique, which is actually capable of causing corporeal damage, rather than just mental. Sadly, the original Mewtwo creation was lost through the carelessness of those guarding it, and thus research was ended, although there are those who make the somewhat laughable claims that the Mewtwo was later involved in terrorism, mass kidnapping, and illegal cloning experiments, as well as a brief stint in the Viridian City gym. Far more likely, say the most notable remaining scientists in the field, the Mewtwo succumbed to the inevitable onset of cancer or some other nasty debilitating condition through its immensely complicated genome. Mew is really an extraordinary Pokémon. Its DNA regulation is so refined that its cells can keep themselves alive under normally lethal conditions. Well, what does that have to do with Mewtwo? As we know, Mewtwo is supposed to be a clone of Mew. Clone meaning genetically identical, which generally means the same appearance. However, from what we can gather from the remains of the research, cloning Pokémon has a high failure rate due to their complexity. In particular, isolating DNA from Pokémon for the cloning process causes all the chromosomes to revert to their pure form, without any modifications to the sugar phosphate backbone. Specifically, cloned DNA lacks methylation that represses transcription of the second chromosome within each pair. In normal cells this usually means an excess of protein and RNAs, which can lead to cell death or cancerous growth. However, Mew's cells prevented this excess from causing death, which instead resulted in extra bulk. The cause behind the other physiological differences are unknown, although our current knowledge concerning cloning complications is far from substantial. Mewtwo holds the distinction of being a genetically modified clone that is larger, heavier and a completely different body color than that of its predecessor. While the creation of Mewtwo has become the point of great controversy, it has also resulted in genetically modified Miltank that produce more burgers than ever before. One of the greater controversies to befall Mewtwo is its placement as Pokémon number 150 in the National Pokédex, right before the Pokémon it was cloned from. This has become the launching point for many Pokémon biologists to argue that the National Pokédex is too Kanto-centric and should be restructured to properly order the genus of Pokémon species, although the placement of Mewtwo seems to be less important than baby Pokémon being placed hundreds of dex spots after their post-evolutions. Recent Mewtwo research is rarely successful but has proven very insightful. One move that appears exclusive to the genetic Pokémon is known as Psystrike. The move capitalizes on Mewtwo's superior psychic powers from being genetically mutated in a giant test tube. Psystrike ignores the standard convention of how special-based moves deal damage to an opponent, and delivers damage based on their physical defense. Evidence of this power was gained in archived footage of multiple slain Chansey at the Cerulean City Pokémon Center as captured on security footage. Studies of how physical and special defenses function slowed down upon Mewtwo's escape, but have regained their activity with the discovery of Psyshock, a move which functions in the same manner but with less power. Mew is one of those species whose rarity is on the borderline of fiction, but its suitability as a cloning object was undeniable, as its genome contains an unparalleled potential with hardly any genetic defects to speak of. The resulting clone was far from identical to its origin, as early analyses of Mewtwo revealed a much smaller arsenal of available battle moves compared to its ancestor, although this was well compensated with increased properties and mental capabilities. Mew was balanced in its entirety, while Mewtwo on the other hand became much more specialized in both function and design. At this time, there should be no researcher alive who isn't unaware of the scientific blunder foreshadowing the sudden escape of this genetic behemoth. Little time to study its behavior patterns along with a lack of discernment made for an ample period for the test subject to not only develop psychological abnormalities, but a strong distaste against its creators as well. This, sadly, inevitably led to its explosive outburst mere weeks after becoming self-aware. With that said, it was never expected to be fully subordinated to any trainer, as its broad psyche and independent nature never paid much respect to human commands. After that failure, the experiment's true purpose have been removed from the official records, although unofficial statements emphasize that the project's true objective was to apply and improve bioengineering methods where the creatured specimen would outclass the original template. Technically, I suppose they succeed. Knowledge and Pokédex entries dictate that Shelmet and Carablast evolve when electrically stimulated in each other's presence, which can be achieved most easily by trading the two Pokémon. To the contrary, recent tests have shown that no common electric-type attack can stimulate evolution. However, captive populations of Carablast and Shelmet have managed to achieve evolution, despite a lack of major electrical stimulation. My colleagues and I have proposed a radical theory on the evolution of the two Pokémon. When fighting, Carablast and Shelmet release a large amount of pheromones not released otherwise. These chemicals are similar to human adrenaline in that they evoke a strong fight-or-flight response, the reaction of the Pokémon being to continue their battle. The extreme force of their attacks damages both Pokémon. What is interesting is that these Pokémon store the pheromones released by the other Pokémon in special, highly sensitive glands in their bodies. When a certain level of these pheromones is achieved in the body, even the slight movement of charged ions before a thunderstorm will trigger the release of these pheromones into the rest of the body. The pheromones trigger a massive cellular response that begins the process of evolution. How each Pokémon's evolution is so morphologically similar to the other Pokémon is currently a mystery, as is much more about this process. What is known, however, is that the energy released in a Pokémon trade somehow accelerates this process, although this as well is little understood. Carablast, upon first glance, is seemingly one of the wimpiest Pokémon one could ever hope to see. Its minuscule stature of 1 foot and 8 inches and its light weight of just 13 pounds makes sure that its pointy horn is not too intimidating. Shelmet, on the other hand, is quite a reclusive creature. The only part of its body sticking outside of its clunky shell is its face, which interestingly enough, is quite small. While both Pokémon are relatively weak unevolved, a strange thing occurs when the two Pokémon are in the presence of one another. It seems as though Shelmet gives up its characteristic armor in exchange for an agile body. Carablast, on the other hand, trades its mobility for a suit of armor. Oddly enough, these Pokémon seem to change their attitudes as well. Carablast no longer remains the wimpy cockroach it once was. Instead, it becomes the well-respected and fierce knight, Escavalier. Shelmet, on the other hand, loses its effeminate lips and becomes shrouded in ninja attire. Its blistering base 145 speed is simply a testament to Excelga's newfound masculinity. Could Shelmet's armor be a catalyst for this evolution, both physically and mentally? We may never know, as a full suit of armor is currently irretrievable from Shelmet, at least ethically, since this Pokémon cannot survive without it unless evolution occurs. Shelmet gathers up steel to form its shell to become an Excelga. Shelmet passes on these techniques to Carablast so it can adapt and transform the shell and become Escavalier. We introduced Shelmet to other bug-type Pokémon that gather up items from the environment to create a protective body, to see if other species could make use of the shell in a similar way as Carablast. One of the first Pokémon we introduced Shelmet to was Burmy. The Burmy was intrigued by Shelmet's shell and began to gather it up, but the steel weighed Burmy down so much that it was unable to move. The other Pokémon was Dwebble. This creature moved quickly into its new home of steel and was released into the wild. When observing the Dwebble, it had a tough time trying to blend into the desert with its new steel home. Eventually, the Dwebble changed homes back to a rock. Carablast and Shelmet are a relatively recent entry into the scientific journals, though their peculiar life cycles have been known to unnerve witch doctors for centuries prior. This relationship is all the more bizarre for the fact that, until recently, the two species did not even share the same habitat, an observation that boggled ecologists. Shelmet were found primarily in the watery moors surrounding Azires City, while Carablast were exclusively found in the grasslands far south of there. Currently, thanks to some clumsy students, the two communities have reintegrated and are currently enjoying a happy predator-prey relationship. The explanation for the bizarre phenomenon of mutual evolution remains a mystery, though that is not to say that hypotheses do not exist. One such theory suggests that the Shelmet and Carablast once existed in the same ecosystem, and had their own separate evolution pathways, with Shelmet evolving into a slow, powerful gastropod knight and Carablast evolving into an agile, predatory ninja beetle. However, once geographically separated, they lost the ecological need for the evolution, rather similarly to Pokémon such as Kadabra and Magoke, and could no longer evolve without an external energy input that activated the enzymes and proteins necessary for evolution. This does not, however, explain on its own why such a thing should only occur while the two are traded together. Another explanation suggests that Carablast and Shelmet were originally a single species that underwent allopatric speciation. Their isolation caused them to differentiate into two species. This may explain why the two must be combined alongside the energy input, in that possibly some biological controls are retained in one but not the other, and vice versa, but there is no fossil evidence for any common ancestor, and analysis of ribosomal RNA sequences suggests that the two are not even closely related. Relatively who remained undiscovered to scientists for so long is an issue that has baffled them since its discovery. As the pre-evolution of the fan-favorite Pikachu, it seems exceedingly ridiculous that it would go unnoticed at all. However, this issue is not seen as a scientific failure, more a failure of the attentiveness of trainers. Scientists now believe that Piku has always been in the public eye, but it was merely just not known to be a separate species from Pikachu. Many trainers simply believed that they were in possession of a dwarf or pygmy Pikachu. Piku, it seems, was believed to be the result of when a Pikachu egg hatches prematurely. This discovery came as a happy surprise to many trainers who love the cuteness of Piku. They now know they can make it hold an Everstone in order to retain its small stature. Piku was the first so-called baby Pokémon discovered and is one of only 6 to be obtainable without the use of an incense. The pressing question when studying Piku is, how can we find wild Pikachu at level 3 in Viridian Forest, if all bred Pikachu beget Piku and it takes many levels of training for a Piku to evolve from happiness? One theory which has been forthcoming is that Piku evolves into Pikachu when it has stored sufficient electricity on its cheeks to activate the evolution process. In the wild, Piku feel at home, and quickly channel all of their electrical energy into evolution. However, Piku are very averse to the Pokeball's unfamiliar environment, so they instead spend all of their energy trying to overcome the capture system. Only once they become very comfortable with their trainer do baby Piku put their energy toward evolution instead. Piku, you know that there are still those out there who believe Piku are a myth. They believe this because it's very hard to imagine how a Pokémon as popular as Pikachu could have a pre-evolution that no one knew about. They think it's all a conspiracy hatched by Professor Elm to pioneer his research on Pokémon eggs. The nature of Piku's discovery is in fact riddled with mysteries. When asked how he, Professor Elm, happened to successfully breed 2 Pikachu in captivity when no one else seemed to be able to, he went on record saying he had no comment. Eerie. Noted Pikachu expert Professor Ketchum was also quite surprised at the news, saying, "I can't believe that Pikachu has a pre-evolution. This makes no sense." It should be noted however that Professor Ketchum responded similarly when he first heard of news of Pikachu's evolution. Riku. If you do ever manage to get your paws on a real Piku, be sure to treat it with love and care. Also be sure to send me a picture because I'm not quite sure they're real either. A baby of one of the most recognizable Pokémon in the world, the evolution of Piku may in fact be a recent development. Within the past 20 years, Pikachu as a species have been in such demand as pets that there has always been a market for small Pikachu from Kanto to Unova. The recent appearance of Piku may be a way for baby species to grow up smaller and unrecognizable to the general Pokémon trainer. This is likely the reason biologists have never been able to find them previously, even in habitats which the Pikachu species is well known to inhabit. Piku have a greater tendency to shock themselves, making them very undesirable as pets for young children. In several cases, the Piku seem to do this on purpose to be released back into the wild. Their smaller tails also allow them to not be caught by the tail traps that are notoriously common in Viridian Forest. If you do happen to own a baby Piku, be sure to raise it with love and care, unless you want the little electric rodent to shock you unintentionally forever. In addition, potential buyers should be aware of where they buy their Piku. In most cases, buying from the egg is the easiest way to obtain one. However, don't just pick one up from any old hiker you find on your local route. Ensure they came from domesticated Pikachu. Your local daycare is the best place to find the ideal Piku egg. Colloquially known as the egg Pokémon, actually shares much more in common with plant seeds than with eggs. It is simply its physical characteristics that earned it its category. If one looks closely at an execute's shell, small cracks can be easily observed. These cracks highly correlate with the respective execute's power level. The strongest execute are often the ones whose shells have completely cracked, leaving an exposed yokai brain open to attack. While this exposed brain can easily be seen as a defensive weakness, trainers will quickly tell you that an execute whose brain is exposed has much more telepathic power than one whose brain is fully encased. While an execute's power can be easy to detect, its evolution has eluded many newbie trainers over the years. This is due to Execute being one of the few Pokémon to evolve only with the aid of a leaf stone. The leaf stone is often subject to study due to its unknown properties and its result being impossible to duplicate in a lab setting. The theory behind the stones is that they harbor core nutrients of an ancient plant. These nutrients act as biological rocket fuel for a few grass-type Pokémon, who usually evolve into a stage barely recognizable from their basic form. This rule applies to Execute, who evolves into Executor, the coconut Pokémon. Often referred to as the walking tropical forest, Executor's only similarity to Execute are the 3 egg-like heads it possesses. These 3 heads raise another unanswered question. Why are there only 3 when all Execute consist of 6 separate eggs? The most widely accepted theory is that after exposure to a leaf stone, a brief, but fierce, telepathic battle begins between the 6 eggs. The result of the battle is this: the strongest 3 go on to become the dominant heads of the Executor while the weaker 3 are broken down into the necessary nutrients needed to complete the Executor's new body. Scientists have been researching evolutionary stones for many years now, and there are still very few clear-cut discoveries of note. One such discovery, however, is that Pokémon are aware of the respective evolutionary stones which will have an effect on them. This becomes especially apparent in many Pikachu, who seem to become highly anxious when in proximity with a Thunderstone. In an experiment conducted recently, only 15% of Pikachu took up the stone when presented with it and thus evolved into a Riku. It is not known whether Pokémon are fully aware of the consequences of close contact with evolutionary stones, but results do seem to indicate that there is something in a Pokémon's psychology that makes it wary of such stones. Studies done on the brains of Pokémon showed a 55% increase in neurological activity when an evolutionary stone was in sight, showing that Pokémon, potentially subconsciously, are fully aware that the stones have some kind of life-changing potential. Evolutionary stone evolutions are so rare in the wild that it has been questioned if Pokémon even want to evolve. Or, if they do they need a trainer to harness the power of the evolutionary stone? Regardless, Thunderstones charge Pikachu up so much that it is packed with energy and its cells divide at double the rate, leading to drastic morphological changes and an increased ability to withstand, dish out high-power electrical attacks. The Nidoran family are common vermin within Kanto city districts. They breed like rabbits, feed like rats, and are as hostile as bears. Luckily, their lesser forms are easily controlled once discovered, and even their evolved forms can be managed if targeted appropriately. But if you leave Moonstone jewelry among the trash, you're in for a world of trouble, as the weak radiation from these gems are enough to trigger a most gruesome reaction in these venomous rodents. Multiple theories have been made regarding the true nature of the energy emitted from moonstones. Contrary to popular belief, it has nothing to do with lunar forces, as the affected species aren't necessarily nocturnal or active during the night. Instead, it's generally believed that the rocks give off gamma rays of a specific frequency, which can cause some species to evolve due to how readily it is absorbed into their genome. This affects their gene expression, and in turn, their hormone production, which causes their body to greatly change its composure. For the most part, this sudden metamorphosis still results in a creature which isn't too different from the stage before it, apart from some additional bulk or new features. But in the case of Nidorino and Nidorina, it's nothing short of a werewolf transformation, and the list of radical changes made to these species is long and constantly expanding. They go from being quadrupedal to bipedal. Their torso becomes fully developed, and their skin grows thicker to function as both armor and poison storage. In short, no cocktail of growth stimulates could possibly come close to this sudden change in physiology, and while these hazardous behemoths prefer a life in seclusion, a rampaging Nidoking is a force of nature one would be unwise to underestimate. Litwick's evolution line is infamous for supposedly destroying the soul of any living creature in close proximity. The most terrifying of these is Chandelier, who can essentially kill its victims twice, once by incinerating the body and again by burning up the soul. Just about every living thing can rejoice in the fact that Chandelier is not found in the wild. However, it is entirely possible that a wild lampent can find a dusk stone left behind by a careless trainer and use it to evolve. Why do occurrences like this not make headlines? It's quite simple, in fact. Chandelier is an unstable mutation of lampent. A controversial study was performed by a group of scientists in Unova where a lampent, a dusk stone, and several Grimer were left in a room together. The lampent actively sought out the dusk stone to evolve and wreaked havoc on the Grimer. Mysteriously, before it could wipe out the Grimer or use up its own PP, the Chandelier collapsed dead on the ground. Chemical tests revealed that Chandelier's cells and DNA had essentially scrambled themselves, causing them to no longer support vital functions. While Unova's recent ban on destructive Pokémon testing has all but halted research, this is a popular theory among Pokémon trainers, who will often have to resort to extreme methods of care for their own created by chance. Trubbish has proven remarkably adaptable within civilized life. In a report last year, a group of Trubbish were used in a sleep study since their stench can make a person sleep for weeks, a longer time than what was even thought possible from other species such as Breloom or Darkrai. Nimbaza city civil servants have used them to catch residents who litter the streets, and the Trubbish appear to enjoy being integrated into the society. While their presence has made Route 5 and 16 a much cleaner place, they appear to have a negative impact on the local Mincino. Locals have reported tarnished coats and large Trubbish-shaped bite marks on some Mincino. Nimbasa city officials are currently putting laws into place which would make it illegal to release Trubbish back into the wild and are attempting to control local populations. It is often wittily remarked in scientific circles that Porygon, cast form, and Trubbish are the personified forms of physics, biology, and chemistry in the Pokémon world, respectively. While I would point out that Mewtwo is a far more fitting avatar of biology, and Magikarp far more fitting of physics, Trubbish is an excellent poster boy for chemistry. After all, it is the only Pokémon in this article created entirely by accident. Official records note that the indigenous Trubbish population of Unova arose from a single industrial spillage in a poorly kept refuse area in Nimbaza city, and the resultant creatures extended their range to the west and east. Recent censuses indicate that they are already spreading south into the colonized desert area, demonstrating their remarkable tolerance for harsh conditions, although Castlia is likely more troubled by the invasive Grimer population at present. Their evolved forms, Garbodor, have even proved hardy enough to migrate north through Entree Forest, despite the threat of native Gotorito and Duosian populations. How exactly they came to be, as it were, is still a mystery, though there are numerous hypotheses to explain the phenomenon. One of these is that the noxious gases produced by the decaying rubbish formed amino acids on contact with the industrial waste, in some manner apparently alike those of Stanley Miller's lightning experiments, and that the resultant primitive life forms developed over time into fully fledged, functional organisms. While this seems far-fetched, it could explain the similarities of this species to known colonial organisms. The metabolism of most creatures follows a standard norm. They eat nutrients and excrete waste. Trubbish and Garbodor, however, eat waste and excrete basic life components. Apart from the occasional belch, the poisonous substances they come in contact with are safely stored within their body structure, and they only make use of them when threatened or in battle. The foul stench that some species envelop themselves with are in fact the smell of sulfur, and many have noted that forests gain tremendously in vigor if a small population of these garbage Pokémon inhabit the area. As they're on a constant search for more waste to add to their inventory, litter and trash are consumed in a quick manner, thus improving the sanitary conditions even further. So despite being a mobile pile of filth, one would make a grave mistake of associating Trubbish with the likes of Mewk and Weezing, as it can be an invaluable asset to cleaning the nature of unwanted materials and pathogens. Poison types in general carry only a few toxins which they can handily use for both defensive and offensive measures. Trubbish and Garbodor, on the other hand, who constantly come in contact with new hazards through their diet, have been confirmed to carry a staggering amount of toxins. Since their bodies are adept at neutralizing any given substance they should absorb, a few individuals alone have been enough to provide medical institutes with hundreds of antidotes to combat various diseases and intoxicated patients. Trubbish is a living trash bag, which is great since plastic bags are so harmless in the first place. However, we see that this animation is actually more beneficial to the environment than if a random bag were blowing around. Furthermore, Trubbish can easily incorporate random non-biodegradable materials such as the previously mentioned bags and metals like mercury. The search for these materials to evolve is the majority of what Trubbish does, so it mostly only learns normal and poison type attacks. That said, it appears that some materials are required for it to evolve successfully. These have not been directly observed, but evidence from Trubbish's egg move pool suggests that some kind of mineral is required before moves such as Rock Blast can be performed. Vespiquen is quite an unusual Pokémon. What really intrigues me the most about Vespiquen is her ability to control a horde of underlings to do her bidding. Research has shown that Vespiquen achieves this through the use of various pheromones. I have reason to believe that these pheromones are released from a gland in the center of Vespiquen's honeycomb structure, which can be placed in three categories: attack order, defend order, and heal order. The pheromones released cause a behavioral change in Vespiquen's underlings, causing them to either defend or heal their queen or attack the opponent. I'm especially curious as to how heal order works. The official Pokédex entry states that the user calls out its underlings to heal it. The user regains up to half of its max HP. However, the way the underlings heal Vespiquen is unknown. My theory is that her underlings carry a special kind of liquid from Vespiquen's honeycombs, which is used to feed and rejuvenate her. This move is quite similar to how Miltank can use milk drink to heal itself, except Vespiquen doesn't have a pheromone command to feed this liquid to fellow Pokémon, as opposed to how Miltank can give its milk away. Comey hives may have the most inconsistent behavior of any Pokémon society I have ever seen, and a large part of that seems to be because their behavior is dependent on the Vespiquen's personality. Unlike most Comey colonies, the hives found in the Sinnoh region usually have a Vespiquen who won't make rash decisions, instead opting to consult a council of female Comey I'd like to call the Comey Congress. While the Comey Congress does allow Vespiquen to make informed orders, it also has the nasty side effect of making this hive's reaction time fairly slow, meaning that hundreds of Comey were often lost to simple threats such as a few hungry Staravia. The Unova hive, on the other hand, was honestly the most terrifying thing I have ever researched. This hive's Vespiquen was much more like an evil dictator than a queen. Any Comey that arrived late would be brutally executed in front of the others as an example. This Vespiquen's army itself was extremely bloodthirsty, as even Pokémon like Excadrill found their flesh completely stripped from their bones within seconds of entering the hive. In a bizarre twist, another female Comey evolved into a Vespiquen during my observations. This led to what I can best describe as a civil war, with the new Vespiquen's army quickly decimating the smaller loyalist army. As it turns out, a Vespiquen without a hive is very similar to one you would find in Pokémon battles, so the kicked-out Vespiquen was easy prey for a female Ursaring. On the bright side, the Teddy Ursa cubs seemed to enjoy the rare delicacy. The queen bee could theoretically be the strongest Pokémon in existence. It has been known that a single Vespiquen can have thousands of Comey as part of her hive. A horde of this size would be able to topple the strongest of opponents in a similar fashion to how eating 1,000 Rage candy bars would give you diabetes. The problem lies in two factors. First is that Vespiquen are natural laissez-faire style leaders and will allow their underlings to perform hive duties as necessary. The second aspect is that Komi are incredibly driven by the need to find and collect as much flower nectar as possible. They will travel incredible distances to acquire the nectar from flowers in bloom from all sorts of regions. Thus, a single hive can have honey ambassadors from as far as Armia to Unova at any given time. Wild Vespiquen will have a dedicated guard unit of around 10 Komi to protect the queen. Court Vespiquen may have as low as 3. However, with the use of their signature attacks, these Vespiquen can attract their traveling hive members even from within their Pokeballs, who may switch in and out with the nearby dedicated guard. This guard of Komi are also trained to avoid the general area of the Vespiquen's trainer as necessary, since having a gang of bee Pokemon constantly buzzing around is a major travel nuisance. Despite being viewed as a strange species with unusual characteristics, I personally don't believe Vespiquen is such a confusing Pokemon, or at least in relation to other species like Ditto or Macamp. Vespiquen releases pheromones into the air, acting as a message to the members of the hive to either defend her, attack the invader, or heal their queen, all of which require too many words to describe completely and exceed the limit of this episode. Supposedly, Vespiquen will only attack if the Komi are unable to defend the hive. After watching a hive defend itself against Pokemon that I released, ignore the fire over there. The Vespiquen didn't seem able to defend properly after the Komi fell. Not being able to deploy its unique skills, it could only use a handful of attacks, surprising even me by using the move Power Gem, originating from the jewel on its head, which is where I assume the pheromones are released. What confuses me personally, however, is the fact that people are unable to tap into the power that Vespiquen holds. Whether through commands, through engineering non-Vespiquen produced pheromones, or even through illegitimate methods, Komi will simply not respond to those commands. Interestingly enough, should one have the trust of a Vespiquen, he or she can easily command the Vespiquen to use those moves, thus commanding the Komi to do what a trainer never could. It has always been a strange case in Pokemon biology. We've always known the simple facts, such as how Wobbuffet uses Counter and Mirror Coat by inflating its body, or how Wobbuffet that were unlucky enough to not learn either move as a Wynaut are quickly consumed by their family. However, basic mysteries remain, such as how these species survive with such a risky battle tactic. After spending over 4 years studying this strange creature, our research team has made some startling discoveries that could change the way this Pokemon is viewed forever. From my observations, all Wobbuffet populations had a bizarre culture centered around enjoying pain. Wobbuffet usually greet each other by bashing their heads against rocks, while mating rituals involved diving headfirst off of cliffs. Wobbuffet's hunting behaviors were further examples of this species' suicidal behavior, as a hunting group will often trap their prey with Shadow Tag and then proceed to play a dangerous game of chicken, with the Wobbuffet who was closest to death getting the most food. I was perplexed by how such a suicidal species could be so common, but it became clear when I observed Wobbuffet nests. Female Wobbuffet lay up to 50 eggs a week, and most of the offspring survive because female Wobbuffet employ an extremely effective tactic of luring prey in and then using their Shadow Tag power to trap them in their nest, giving the many hungry Wynaut plenty of food to help them grow into strong and pain-loving Wobbuffet. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Newton was a smart fellow, but he certainly never met Wobbuffet, as every amount of force initially exerted upon it will return with twice the power. The evolution of this species has proven to be quite rapid in the face of its near extinction. The rapid development of their Shadow Tag ability has proven to assist in stabilizing their population, allowing the species to maintain a strategic, if suicidal, advantage over their opponents. In the past, any species with Shadow Tag was not allowed to flee another Pokémon with Shadow Tag. During these dark days Wobbuffet would trap each other, sometimes completely accidentally. Even during these accidents, Wobbuffet are so stubborn that they will continue to trap each other with Shadow Tag until one of them passes out. Nowadays, most Wobbuffet aren't affected by shadow tag from others of its species, indicating that they may have grown immune to the effects of their own ability over time. Pokémon rights activists have recently discovered many criminal enterprises where Wobbuffet are forced into tight living spaces and then subjected to a small electrical jolt which would become mirror-coated, all in an attempt to generate energy. This was discovered when a Pokémon Center noticed the repeated visits of trainers carrying nothing but 6 Wobbuffet. When a team of Pokémon biologists examined the abused species, they appeared to be less humorous than usual Wobbuffet. While they do seem to enjoy the pain of reflecting attacks, even they know when they are being abused. The species clearly has enormous power despite being incredibly docile. Wobbuffet is one of the more forgotten Pokémon, relegated to the spot in any trainer's mind where the trainer questions the existence of such a bizarre Pokémon. If natural selection applies to Pokémon, particularly when it comes to the likes of Kabuto, Wobbuffet would be long gone. But it isn't, implying that it's something more than just a blue punching bag. Wobbuffet is pretty much the poster child of this episode, being possibly the only Pokémon featured that is completely useless without its specialty. When Counter and Mirror Coat are removed from consideration, it's left with moves like Splash, Safeguard, and Destiny Bond. Splash, as any trainer worth his name knows, is absolutely useless, possibly even detrimental. Safeguard allows it to defend against status moves. Why are you afflicting Wobbuffet with poison? Just kill it already. Destiny Bond is the only move that can kill something, but at the cost of its own life. Now, you'll have hopefully noticed that I said Wobbuffet learns Splash. Only a few other Pokémon know this move, and as you would think, many of them live in the oceans, lakes, and rivers. I personally believe that Wobbuffet and Wynaut used to be water-based species, and eventually became colored blue in order to blend in better with the ocean. Wobbuffet's attack methods in battle are quite different to that of any Pokémon ever discovered. Its ability to absorb the opponent's attacks and deal damage back is something only it has mastered. After observing my Zangoose battle a wild Wobbuffet, it seemed that whenever my Zangoose would attack, Wobbuffet's body would inflate, absorbing the damage dealt. Wobbuffet could then shoot out an attack from its body while it slowly deflated. From what I gather, Wobbuffet's brain is located in its tail, and when Wobbuffet is about to get attacked, its tail quickly messages the body to relax, causing Wobbuffet to grow larger in size. Another intriguing thing about Wobbuffet is how it only lives in dark places such as caves, so it can more easily protect its tail from an opponent by hiding it out of sight. Because Wobbuffet's body is so difficult to damage, it's only natural to think that Wobbuffet's tail is where it really feels pain. If introduced to a well-lit area, it will often thrash about wildly in a desperate attempt to keep its tail safe. Wobbuffet has been observed to faint if their tail is directly attacked, although the offender can faint as well if under the influence of Destiny was, and still is, a huge milestone for science and engineering alike. Mankind has known for a long time how to convert Pokémon into portable condensed energy, but this Cyberduck was the first successful attempt to reverse the process and make Pokémon out of energy instead. Granted, there was much left to be desired about its appearance and behavior, but patches and updates that have been made have significantly decreased the gap between Porygon and wild Pokémon in terms of agility and capacity. Since it's been molded within a virtual furnace, it's also strictly protected by copyright, and any hope of actually owning one can only be realized through large research funds or rigorous casino activity. The creators of Porygon are keen to repeat how it's entirely made out of program code, which is sadly closer to a commercial slogan rather than a dependable fact. What is true is that Porygon's physiological state can be attributed to its software, and that it's capable of redistributing its energy between the physical and virtual realm. Its code never defined which type Porygon would be, even though many assumed it would become electric by default. As things have turned out, battle observations concluded it to be of the normal type. This in turn has sparked plenty of discussion on whether or not normal is an individual type, or merely the absence of any other type? But that's another subject for another day. Ah yes, Porygon, a demonstration of the very best of late 90s digital technology. While I have immense respect for anyone who can code an organism such as this in binary as opposed to the classic triplet code of DNA, I must admit that Porygon's introduction into the biosphere has left a fair amount to be desired. Despite the attempt to merge the best attributes of every Pokémon into one, Porygon lacked any sort of ecological niche and the species was wiped out within months. It was determined that the original Porygon lacked the variability and adaptability to succeed, and so a whole host of unique moves and abilities were programmed into later models. Sadly, they still fall short of the huge expectations placed upon them when released. Currently, the most up-to-date version of the species is being monitored within the secluded ecosystem of White Forest in Unova. It is interesting to note that one of the laboratories that worked on the Porygon 2 upgrades, the P2 laboratory in southern Unova, would later use the data and code from the Porygon study in the design of Genesect, a digital organic hybrid which built a computer-based neural network into the foundation of the exoskeleton of an extinct Cambrian arthropod. Genesect was ultimately successful as the spiritual successor to the Porygon project, despite the immense public outcry caused by the publication of the study. Most unfortunately, the species produced by this experiment was infertile, and as such the project has hit a new roadblock. We can easily insert computer chips into living things, giving us remote control of them. Upon investigation, Porygon is the opposite. The scientists appear to have successfully integrated living biomass into a circuit network, appropriately shaped like a duck. Scientists appear to have modified Porygon's DNA structure, allowing snippets of code to latch onto the double helix. But without the complex regulatory mechanisms of transcription, there was little prototype Porygon could actually do besides its programmed movement. In the wild, Porygon has some control over these snippets. Once captured, voice commands are the primary initiation factors. As Porygon levels up, more and more of the DNA can be decompressed, allowing for a wider variety of moves. Porygon seems to be in an odd egg group, mineral. After all, most of the Pokémon in it are either ground, rock, or steel type. However, scientists were in need of material that could amplify some psychic capabilities, as well as phase out of reality when Porygon enters cyberspace. They based it off some fragments of Beldum, sent by Professor Birch. Porygon's move pool reflects the usage of a weak psychic-type Pokémon. Porygon can only learn Psybeam. A trademark is required for Psychic. That said, for some reason, Porygon is still normal type, but I suppose the mysteries of biological engineering haven't all been solved as of yet. The virtual Pokémon Porygon, once the most state-of-the-art piece of publicly available technology. Porygon was always meant to be a research tool above all, and only later were there any considerations for its use in the public as a Pokémon like any other. However, during a broadcast of a Porygon advertisement, over 700 Kanto schoolchildren were sent to the Pokémon Center for seizures. This devastated any profit motives the Porygon research team had of selling their research to the public. No Pokemart would stock it. The first place to sell them was the Celadon City Game Corner. It was originally intended that the Porygon species would be able to evolve naturally, based on the environment that they were raised in. Scientists believed their program was adaptable enough to process the information of its local environment and evolve as necessary. However, like using any old computer, Porygon lacked hard drive space to accomplish this goal. Soon, even basic research in cyberspace was difficult for Porygon since it could be defeated by a rogue pop-up ad. This spurred the further development of the Cyberduck into its later evolutions Porygon 2 and Porygon Z. Undergoes a stunning transformation through its life cycle. Upon fertilization, the eggs of female Jellicent begin to develop into larvae seeds, which are then released and anchored onto the seafloor. These larvae then grow into microscopic polyps, which bud off from each other, multiplying in numbers. Certain environmental conditions trigger the radical metamorphosis from a vegetative stationary existence to a mobile pulsing creature, the medusa. These medusas rapidly grow in size, and in a matter of days they develop into visible frillish. Eventually they mature into the spectacular gellicent that sailors and marine Pokémon fear. The thought of a microscopic polyp growing into a 7-foot undulating terror always gave me convulsions. The anatomy of gellicent is poorly studied, but it seems to exhibit a simplistic structure, primarily an epidermis lining the outer body, the gut which opens to the external environment, and the gelatinous space where their simple nervous system reside. No gas exchange chambers or circulation system are found, mostly because the nutrients can easily diffuse uniformly throughout gellicent's body, thanks to the large gut. Of course, this invertebrate creature lacks no musculoskeletal structure either. Despite the relative simplicity of their nervous system, gellicent seem to have a central nervous system capable of learning and memory, thus making it possible for trainers to tame them. Gellicent's eyes and mouth are curious accessories that brings up more questions. From what we know, their rudimentary eyes detect light to know which direction is the ocean's surface. It is also rumored that gellicent can coexist in the plane of life and death. The eyes can see the glimmer of life energy of living organisms from the vast lifeless dark ocean. This is how gellicent can sniff out their prey. The pair of eyes and mouth may also contribute in its eccentric feeding. For one, its eyes are necessary to hex its prey. The mouth expels pressurized water towards the direction they detect life force to stun its prey. It may also have the ability to draw the life force into gellicent. Studies have reported that male gellicent can even detect the pink bioluminescence emitted by female gellicent, most probably to approach and release their sperm. I only have respect for gellicent that are simple in body plan yet mysteriously complex. Is the Lucario of the generation. It was revealed early and mimics Lucario by being a bipedal animal. Where it really sets itself apart is in its ability. Zoroark's ability is illusion, which allows Zoroark to change its appearance to anything it wants. I remember this one time when I went on this great date with this girl. She was super pretty and we had a great time. But as the night wore on, she kept letting out this weird evil cackle. Anyway, it turned out this girl was a Zoroark in disguise. I found that out the hard way when I went in for a goodnight kiss, and I got a flamethrower to the face. Well, I've gone thoroughly off track and my editor is giving me a very evil look. Oh, no. What if he's a Zoroark too? No, that'd be ridiculous. So, Zoroark uses its ability in battle to confuse and bamboozle the opposing Pokémon. Your opponent might send out a fighting-type Pokémon like Hitmonlee out against your psychic-type Alakazam. You laugh and command your genius Pokémon to use Psybeam, only for it not even affect the Hitmonlee, who in return uses a powerful Night Daze to knock out your Kazam. What happened? The Hitmonlee was a crafty Zoroark in disguise. And just like that female Zoroark did to me, it lured you into a realm of false security and then pulled the rug from right under your feet. Seriously? I spent good money on that date. I could have at least gotten a kiss. There's that look again. I'm starting to believe the editor may well be a Zoroark. Maybe everyone on staff is the illusion master. Zoroark is truly an enigma of the Pokémon world. Zoroark uses its illusions to hunt undetected amongst hordes of Patrat and Blitzel, two of the most difficult to hunt Pokémon in Unova. It does this by using its ability to disguise itself as one of the herd and slowly weeding out the weakest member from the inside, guaranteeing it a kill almost 100% of the time. However, there is a downside to Zoroark's master plan. Unlike Ditto, Zoroark's transformation is merely an illusion, so a few keen-eyed Pokémon and trainers can spot this if they look closely enough. Zoroark is also unable to transform into Pokémon it has never seen before, meaning many young Zoru are sitting ducks for the region's more physically powerful predators. Once grown though, they become masters of illusion and very difficult Pokémon to catch or defeat. As the others above me have mentioned, Zoroark has the ability to create accurate illusions that are almost impossible to distinguish from reality, if it wasn't for a few tricky cues. While Zoroark can make itself appear as a particular Pokémon, it cannot copy its moves or ability, so knowing this can help you determine whether you are facing a Pokémon, let's say Gyarados, or a Zoroark disguised as said Pokémon. First off, Gyarados' abilities are either Moxie or Intimidate, so if a Gyarados comes into a battle and Intimidate doesn't activate and neither does Moxie when it gets a KO, it would definitely be a Zoroark. Gyarados are also known to be strong physical attackers whereas Zoroark is not, so that would also help you determine whether a Zoroark is disguised as a Gyarados. However, this ability isn't just useful in a battle. Zoroark are known to be very protective of other Zoroark and Zorua in their packs and will use their illusion ability to disguise as other Pokémon to scare off predators and, if they are in big danger, use their illusion ability to create an entirely different landscape. Poor thing. Poster child of Gen V, yet special ability is just a dumbed down transform in the form of an ability. Sure, the illusions are extremely powerful, but it's not real. It just looks real, like Mulk's badges. Sure, it may sound like I'm bashing the ability and Zoroark, but in all honesty, it's an amazing ability. Oh, a Macamp challenging you? Run away, hide behind a rock, appear to be an alt area or something, and scare the Macamp off. In battle, facing down a Keldeo. Well, you're a Gengar. You get the idea. Without its illusions, Zoroark is still pretty well off. It has a nice move pool supported by 120 special attack, and enough speed to outspeed base 100s, and it's weak to only 2 types, one of which is pretty much unheard of. Plus, it's a scary Pokémon.